Chapter 702. In a sanatorium on the outskirts of Qing City. Uncle Chi stood in front of the door and looked at Zhan Haoze with disapproval in his eyes. "Young master, now that the Zhan family is in your hands, why do you get out of the way?" Zhan Haoze's voice was extremely indifferent. He looked at Uncle Chi, who was standing in front of him, with an ice-cold gaze. Uncle Chi gritted his teeth and was extremely regretful. He still wanted to stop him, but the people beside Zhan Haoze had already stopped him. Just like that, Zhan Haoze pushed open the door behind him and walked in. The environment of the room inside was very good. It wasn't like an ordinary apartment for the elderly. The room was very big and there was a bed in the middle. Zhan Kun was sleeping on the bed. There was a wheelchair near the bed. It was already winter in Qing City, and the wind was cold outside. Because of the previous stroke, Zhan Kun couldn't move half of his body. But he was still conscious and could still move. When he saw Zhan Haoze enter the door, his eyes widened. He looked at him as if he was looking at an enemy. You. After 2 strokes in a row, Zhan Kun's voice was hoarse. He raised a hand to point at Zhan Haoze. But he only had one hand that he could move, and it was trembling when he raised it. This made him even angrier, and the expression on his face looked very ferocious. Zhan Haoze didn't notice the gloomy expression on his face. He walked to the bed, pulled out a chair beside him and sat down. His legs were elegantly folded together. You, be ****. Zhan Haoze looked at him and said the last 2 words for him. "Let's change the words. You have to know that this be **** is also your seed." Zhan Kun's face had already turned purplish red. Zhan Haoze sneered. "Isn't it? If you didn't give birth to my father, where would I come from?" He chuckled and supported his chin with one hand. "So, aren't you the be *****? Zhan Kun was panting heavily. Zhan Haoze looked at his agitated expression. "By the way, you probably don't know, right? The Zhan family is now in my hands." Nothing made Zhan Kun more angry and resentful than this. When he saw Zhan Haoze enter the door and knew that Zhan Haoze wasn't dead, he already knew that something must have gone wrong. Now, Zhan Haoze's words made him realize that someone had lied to him. "Speaking of which, I really have to thank your good subordinates. If Uncle Chi hadn't handed the Zhan family to me, how could I have gotten the Zhan family so easily?" Zhan Kun couldn't even speak fluently. He pointed at Zhan Haoze, his eyes full of resentment. "About 4 or 5 months. Do you know what I've done in the past 4 or 5 months?" Zhan Haoze didn't need his response. He only came today to let Zhan Kun know what he was capable of. "That Zhani you're interested in. Last month, he made a mistake in his investment and then accidentally slept with Brother Rong's woman. He's being hunted down by Brother Rong." You. Zhan Kun's face had already begun to turn green. Zhan Haoze frowned slightly. "Logically speaking, Zhani is a member of the Zhan family. Brother Rong has to give the Zhan family some face. But I told him that he didn't need to give me face, and that he should deal with it as he should." Zhan Kun covered his heart with one hand. He couldn't even say the word "you" now. As for Zhan Yi's father, Zhan Ji. And because his son was being hunted down by Brother Rong, he looked for Brother Rong. He wanted to take revenge on Brother Rong, but he accidentally died in Brother Rong's hands. Tsk, how pitiful. Zhan Kun had already begun to pant heavily, and his face turned from green to black. "Alright, there's also Zhan Li and Zhan Yang. I asked them to develop a branch in South Africa. You know, we don't have a branch in South Africa. The 2 of them are the same. Their tempers are too bad. They are very arrogant in the local area, and they have conflicts with the locals. Now, one of them has 2 broken legs and the other has a pair of broken hands. How tragic." Zhan Kun raised his hand again, wanting to point at Zhan Haoze. Zhan Haoze laughed. "Your other son, Zhan Quan, was scared out of his wits. He brought his 2 stupid sons, Zhan Cheng and Zhan Shi. He went back to his father-in-law's side. He took the initiative to call me and told me that he would never take a step into Qing City in his life. He just asked me to spare their families' lives. Look, Min Quan is my uncle after all. Since he begged me like this, of course I agreed. It's just that his wife thinks he's useless and now she's divorcing him every day. Last time, she accidentally fell down the stairs when the 2 of them were fighting. It's said that she suffered a fracture and is still in the hospital. This has nothing to do with me." Zhan Kun put down his hand again and his body was half curled up. He looked at Zhan Haoze with red eyes, but he couldn't say a word. "Oh right, after saying so much, I haven't talked about Zhan Lai, who is currently staying in the Zhan family's mansion." Zhan Kun's eyes were about to pop out, and the veins on his forehead were popping out. "Don't worry, his hands and feet are still there. Other than not being able to go out and not having freedom, there's nothing bad about it. It's just that his wife isn't very good. Every day she looks at Zhang Li and Zhang Yang's broken hands and feet and curses me 800 times a day. Zhang Kuan's face was already full of pain. He was originally half sitting, but now his body was curled up. His face, which was already covered with age spots, was full of pain. You must be wondering why I didn't do anything to the couple, right? Don't worry, I like to take it slow. Keep them and slowly torture them. Zhang Kuan was already speechless. He looked like he was about to suffocate in pain. Zhang Haoze stood up at this moment and looked down at the old man who was already old and didn't have the ability to resist. Do you hate me? That's right. Don't worry, I won't let you die. Here, I will invite the best medical team to save your life. I want you to watch how the Zhang family flourishes in my hands, and how it will be destroyed bit by bit in my hands. Looking at Zhang Kuan, who had already begun to roll his eyes and was about to faint, Zhang Haoze's gaze was cold. When you shot my mother, you should have thought of today. Before Zhang Kuan lost consciousness, he bent down. Back then you really should have killed me as well. After saying this, Zhang Haoze stood up and left without looking back. Zhang Kuan completely fainted. Zhang Haoze left the room and asked his men to loosen the restraints on Uncle Qi. Uncle Qi didn't even have the time to say anything harsh. He hurriedly ran into the room. Master Kuan, how are you? Zhang Haoze waved his hand, and doctors and nurses immediately rushed in. He glanced at the doctor who was walking at the back. Keep him alive. Don't let him die. I want him to live a little longer. When he left the sanatorium, Zhang Haoze was in a very good mood. Tang Hua looked at the joy on his face. Boss, are we going back to the company now or go to Lin City? In the few months since he took over the Zhang family, those people had been playing small tricks and making big moves. He had escaped death a few times and averted danger a few times. Last time he was almost injured and didn't even have a good new year. In such a situation he didn't have the time to look for Shi Mengwan. The last time Shi Mengwan said that she wanted to return to Lin City, he let her go for her safety. Now that the problem was almost solved, of course he had to go and bring him back. Yes. Tang Hua nodded, but he suddenly thought of something else. Oh right, boss, President Hua's wife gave birth to a pair of twins. In 2 days there will be a full moon banquet. The invitation has already been sent over. Mrs. Hua and Miss Shi have such a good relationship, so Miss Shi will definitely attend. Why don't we go to Rong City first? Otherwise, if we go to Lin City and Miss Shi goes to Rong City? Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes. Then let's go to Rong City. Help me prepare a generous gift. Not to mention the cooperation with Zhang Haoze. With Shi Mengwan and Su Qingsang's relationship, there would be plenty of interaction in the future. Since that was the case, of course he had to prepare a generous gift. Okay. Zhang Haoze relaxed and thought of Shi Mengwan's beautiful face. With her personality, he believed that she would be angry with him for not looking for her for so long. When they met tomorrow, perhaps he should coax her. Zhang Haoze, who had solved most of the trouble, was already thinking about how to coax Shi Mengwan. The full moon banquet of the Hua family's twins was indeed extremely lively. When Zhang Haoze arrived in Rong City, he asked Tang Hua to check. Shi Mengwan had come the day before yesterday. Moreover, she was staying at the Hua family's house with Su Qingsang. Zhang Haoze wouldn't go to the Hua family to look for her. After enduring for a day, he finally had the chance to see Shi Mengwan today. He had been around Rong City a lot these few years and many people knew him. Especially recently, the Zhang family in Qing City had been in turmoil. Zhang Haoze had almost become a popular figure in Qing City. After greeting a few people who had worked with him before and having to socialize, he finally saw Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan didn't see him. At this moment, she was in front of Su Qingsang and looking at the baby in her arms. Her eyes were full of smiles, and her gaze at the baby was very gentle. He had never seen Shi Mengwan like this before. Zhang Haoze was just about to go forward when a man came. Wan Xianyang, Hua Jinyao's childhood friend. The way he looked at Shi Mengwan made him very unhappy. He knew that Shi Mengwan didn't like Wan Xianyang, but having such a man appear by Shi Mengwan's side from time to time was enough to make him unhappy. In the past he had no choice. In order to destroy the Zhang family he had to endure it. But now he didn't need to endure it. Naturally, he didn't need to watch Wan Xianyang fawn over his woman. Fortunately, before he could go forward, Shi Mengwan had already taken the initiative to stand far away. Then, she excused herself to go to the bathroom and left. He followed behind her. He didn't expect that Shi Mengwan would send Wan Xianyang away, and then Li Junxing would come. Li Junxing was a person who was even more difficult to deal with than Wan Xianyang. In the past 2 years he had made a lot of moves in Lin City. He had pulled down a group of people and helped another group of people. The key was that such a person actually didn't have any money on his hands. And he clearly saw it. Li Juanxing's eyes revealed interest in Shi Mengwan. That was really not a good thing for him. 10 minutes later, he looked at Shi Mengwan, who was suppressed under him. She was clearly very surprised to see him. But the surprise was only for a moment. Her eyes quickly revealed other emotions. Are you crazy? Is this the men's bathroom? Looking at the accusation in her eyes, he thought about how she was able to smile at Li Juanxing just now. In the end, Zhang Haoze couldn't help it. He lowered his head and kissed her lips in a very domineering manner. Ever since they parted that day, the two of them hadn't seen each other for a long time. It wasn't that he didn't want to look for her, or even that he didn't want to contact her. It was just that the situation in the Zhan family was complicated. Not to mention those illegitimate children that Zhan Kuan had admitted, there were also many people with the surname Zhan that he hadn't made public. Although Zhan Kuan didn't recognize these people, he was still somewhat related to them. After all these years, Zhan Ji, Zhan Quan, Zhan Lai, and the others had their own forces in the Zhan family in Qing City. He had made a deal with Uncle Qi, but it didn't mean that he had made a deal with other people. It was better to be safe than sorry. In order not to put her in any danger, he could only suppress the urge to see her. Zhang Haoze, let go of me. When he let go of her, the first thing she said made him unhappy again. She would always let go of him, break up, not want to see him and resist. But she could be 30% smiling and 70% gentle to other men. The longing that he hadn't seen her for a long time, coupled with the stimulation of seeing her chatting and laughing with other men, made him a little speechless. Wan Xianying, Hua Jinyao's childhood friend. The second young master of the Wan family. Now he runs 2 antique shops. Among them, Gu Longshuan's business is the biggest. Every year, it brings Wan Xianying hundreds of millions of profits. This was only Gu Longshuan's shop. As for the other businesses, this second young master of the Wan family was also doing quite well. As for the other one, Li Juanxing, the mayor of Lin City. His family has been in the right place for generations. Li Juanxing is young, but he is already the leader of Lin City. In the past year, through the investment of a master, he has developed and renovated the old city area of Lin City. He is very popular in Lin City. I didn't expect you to be so good at seducing men. You can actually attract the favor of 2 men like this in one go. Seeing Shi Mengwan angrily slap him, Zhang Haoze grabbed her hand. Are you angry? He should be the one who was angry, right? Why didn't she know how to keep her distance from other men? Shi Mengwan wasn't just angry. She was simply furious. Zhang Haoze, not every man is like you. Like me? What do you mean? Zhang Haoze leaned over and leaned close to Shi Mengwan's face. His breath pointed at her cheek. Don't you like people like me? Who likes you? Isn't it you? It was said that men didn't recognize people after getting out of bed. This woman in front of her was the one who didn't recognize people after getting out of bed, right? Who was the one who kept calling me husband last time? Who was the one who said she loved me? Who liked me? Who was the one who kept asking me to F***CKU? Shi Mengwan's hand was grabbed by Zhang Haoze, but she was so angry that her face turned red. If this man hadn't shamelessly used such a method to force her last time, why would she have said so many shameless words? When she thought about the last time the two of them had sex, she couldn't bear to look back at what this man had done to her. Every time she thought about it, she would be so embarrassed that she couldn't show her face. Now he had to bring it up again. Shi Mengwan couldn't hit him, so she was angry. She simply moved her mouth forward and bit his arm with all her might. She bit very hard. The grievance of being entangled with Zhang Haoze for more than a year, the humiliation of being bullied by him again and again, and the shame of being forced to be a mistress. At this moment, it all turned into the strength of her teeth. The more she bit, the harder she bit. She even tasted the taste of blood. She didn't let go, so Zhang Haoze let her bite. It wasn't until she bit her lips until they were numb and she couldn't bite anymore that she had no choice but to retreat. He finally hooked up her chin and made her look at him. How ruthless. He looked at the blood on her lips and gently wiped it away. The words that came out of his mouth made Shi Mengwan want to bite him again. Fortunately, you bit my hand. If you bit my brother, you won't have any happiness in your next life. Shi Mengwan opened her mouth to bite him again, but he hugged her. At the same time, he lowered his head and gave her another long kiss. When he kissed her until she couldn't breathe, he finally let go of her and hugged her limp body in his arms. He lowered his head and kissed the top of her head. My hand is so hard. It's a waste of energy for you to bite me. You'll even make your teeth hurt. He leaned close to her ear and gently nibbled on her earlobe. If you really like biting people so much, I'd rather you bite another part of me? Understanding the hint in Zhang Hao's words, Shi Mingwan thought of the embarrassing scene from last time. She couldn't stay any longer. She pushed him away forcefully. Zhang Hao hugged her waist and hugged her again. It's boring to participate in such a banquet. Why don't we leave first? If you want to leave, you can leave. I'm not leaving. She especially liked Su Qingsang's pair of twins. She couldn't wait to hug them for a while longer. She didn't want to leave just like that. You like children? Zhang Hao looked at her and knew what she was thinking. If you really like them so much, let's have one too. Have one? Shi Mingwan suddenly turned around and looked at him. Her eyes were filled with mockery. Zhang Hao, you said you want to have a child with me? Yes. Can't I? Do you know what it means for you to have a child with me? What? The child has to take my surname and enter the Shi family tree. Shi Mingwan sneered. Her face was deliberately embarrassed. More importantly, I'm not even married to you. Why should I have a child with you? You want to marry me? Zhang Hao looked at her. There was a look in his eyes that Shi Mingwan had never seen before. Do you dare? The sarcasm on Shi Mingwan's face deepened. Do you dare to marry me? Zhang Hao, do you dare to make it public? Do you dare to let others know that I'm your girlfriend? Instead of hiding and sneaking around like before. Did he dare? Zhang Hao looked at the obvious provocation in her eyes and reached out to pull her hand. You want to make it public? You want to marry me? You want others to know that I'm your boyfriend? Yes, I do. But do you dare? She had had enough. She had had enough of him coming and going as he pleased. She didn't want to endure it anymore. He had taken everything from her, but he could still let other women get close to him. More importantly, she had had enough of him having a fiancé. And she had to bear the blame of being the third party. She had had enough of all of this. She had already given him many chances time and again, over and over again. Now she didn't want to give him another chance. This was the last time. If he couldn't do it, then he would never come looking for her again. This wasn't in Qing City, nor was it in Lin City. This was Rong City. Hua Jinyao's territory. And she believed that with Hua Jinyao's ability and her relationship with Su Qingsang, Hua Jinyao would definitely be able to protect her from being harassed by Zhang Hao. Seeing that Zhang Hao didn't say anything, Shi Mingwan sneered and asked again, Do you dare? Zhang Hao looked at her with a rare smile on his face. He suddenly grabbed her hand and led her outside. Shi Mingwan was shocked by his sudden action. She followed behind him and the two of them left the men's bathroom together. Coincidentally, someone was coming over to use the bathroom. Seeing a man and a woman leaving together, the other party's gaze made Shi Mingwan feel extremely embarrassed again. She wished she could find a hole to hide in. She glared at Zhang Hao hatefully. It was all his. Every time she met him, nothing good happened. He always embarrassed her. While she was distracted, Zhang Hao had already brought her to the hall. Shi Mingwan, who realized what Zhang Hao was going to do, had no time to retreat. Just like that, she held hands with Zhang Hao and appeared in front of everyone. Su Qingsang had just coaxed Nian Nian and was about to carry her to the nanny when she saw Zhang Hao and Su Qingsang coming out hand in hand. Her eyes widened as if her eyeballs were about to fall out. Hua Jinyao happened to be surrounded by a group of childhood friends. He held her in his arms and thought about it. Wan Xianying was extremely envious. He was about to coax Hua Jinyao into giving him a hug when he saw it from the corner of his eyes. His eyes widened for a moment. The moment he saw Zhang Hao, he remembered who this person was. He had no choice. Who asked Zhang Hao to be too famous in the past few months? In terms of methods and scheming, who could compare to Zhang Hao? Just based on the methods he used to deal with his cousins and uncles in the Zhang family, this person made people feel a chill run down their spines. But now, such a chilling man was holding a woman's hand with a gentle expression? It was too late for Shi Mingwan to retract her hand. Su Qingsang had already seen it. Zhang Hao held her hand and walked towards Su Qingsang. Su Qingsang really didn't have a good impression of Zhang Hao. Last year, when she went to Qing City to play, she saw him with another woman. He originally had a fiancée in Lin City. Later, when she saw what he did, she disliked him even more. Even if Zhang Hao and Hua Jinyao had business dealings, that was only between men. From her point of view, she really didn't like people like Zhang Hao. Mrs. Hua. Zhang Hao put his arm around Shi Mingwan's waist and nodded slightly. Thank you for taking care of Wan these few days. Thank you. Su Qingsang blinked. She looked at Zhang Hao and then at Shi Mingwan and suddenly smiled. President Jean, you're welcome. Wanwan is my best friend. It's my duty to take care of her. However, I don't understand President Jean's thank you. May I know in what capacity, President Jean, are you thanking me? Wanwan's boyfriend and future husband, Jean Hausa announced. He tightened his arm around Shi Mingwan's waist and let her get closer to him. When Wanwan and I get married, please come to the wedding, Mrs. Hua. This was really a smooth answer. Shi Mingwan looked at him, the expression on her face very interesting. Chapter 703. But when she thought that what Jean Hausa said might be true, her heart suddenly beat fast. Su Qingsang was already married and had a child. Even though she used to be a little cold. After these days she had changed a lot. She looked at the seriousness in Jean Hausa's eyes and stood up. Sorry, Mr. Jean, I have a few words to say to Wanwan. Mrs. Hua, if you have anything to say, you can say it directly. Wanwan is thin-skinned. I'm afraid she will be shy. Su Qingsang almost choked on her own saliva. Shi Mingwan was thin-skinned? When the two of them were together in the past, which one of them was the one who would talk dirty at the slightest disagreement? Now Jean Hausa was telling her that Shi Mingwan was thin-skinned? The corner of her mouth twitched and she glanced at Shi Mingwan. Shi Mingwan was really a little embarrassed. She glared at Jean Hausa. Qingsang, I'll tell you later. Wait a minute. Su Qingsang pulled her body to her side, leaned close to her ear and said very softly, What's going on? Don't ask. Shi Mingwan was really embarrassed. I'll tell you later. Okay. Today was the big day of the twins, so it wasn't convenient for her to keep pestering Shi Mingwan. However, if he forced you, you can tell me. I'll let Hu Jinyao deal with him. Su Qingsang said this in a low voice, but Jean Hausa heard it clearly. Qingsang. Shi Mingwan's expression was a little subtle. Su Qingsang patted her hand and stood up like a family member to look at Jean Hausa. President Jean seems to have a fiancée? Yes. Although Jean Hausa and Chen Feifei hadn't been officially engaged, everyone in Lin City knew about it. We've broken off the engagement. Really? Su Qingsang raised her eyebrows. Why haven't I heard about it? How could such a sensational thing as breaking off the engagement be brushed aside so easily? The two sides have made a private agreement, but it hasn't been announced yet. It hasn't been announced, which means that President Jean still has a fiancée. Su Qingsang spoke impolitely. If that's the case, how can you claim that you're Wanwan's boyfriend? What do you think of Wanwan? Qingsang. Shi Mingwan didn't want Su Qingsang and Jean Hausa to have a conflict now. Stop it. How can I not tell you? Some things have to be clarified. Su Qingsang was extremely protective. How can you believe him just because he said something nice? Mrs. Hua, my engagement with Chen Feifei has long been dissolved. This matter, after I ask him, will be made public. As for me and Wanwan, my feelings for Wanwan are naturally serious. Don't worry, I won't let her down. Anyone can say nice things. Not many can do it. Su Qingsang wasn't targeting Jean Hausa, but this man had a bad record. If he wasn't with Shi Mingwan, no matter how many women he had relationships with, it was none of her business. However, her friendship with Shi Mingwan was different, so she naturally couldn't bear to see her good sister being bullied. Say something nice, I don't know how to do it. But I think I can prove it with my actions. Jean Hausa was still holding Shi Mingwan's hand. Shi Mingwan turned to look at him because of his words. His overly sincere eyes made her a little moved for a moment. Su Qingsang wanted to say something, but someone else came. The Hua family had many relatives and friends in the business world. As Hu Jinyao's wife, there were naturally many people who came to get close to her. Su Qingsang didn't have time to pay attention to Shi Mingwan, so she gave her a look, signaling her to talk later. However, if she was a little later, Shi Mingwan would be taken away by Jean Hausa. Jean Hausa didn't like such occasions. After taking Shi Mingwan to the public, he stayed for a while and left with her. The hotel that Jean Hausa booked was in the presidential suite upstairs. He took Shi Mingwan directly upstairs. Shi Mingwan actually hadn't recovered from Jean Hausa's action of revealing her identity just now. When she was taken upstairs, Jean Hausa kissed her lips. When he kissed her, he didn't forget to take off her red coat. The sleeveless dress underneath was revealed. He held her waist and brought her into his arms. He had wanted to do this when he was in the men's bathroom. As he kissed her, Shi Mingwan gradually came back to her senses. Just as his hand was about to continue, she grabbed his hand. Jean Hausa stopped and pressed his forehead against hers. Wanwan, the clear breath on his body brushed against her face, and she almost fell into his bewitching trap again. Blinking, she pressed her hands against his chest to calm herself down. Jean Hausa, you said that you broke off the engagement with Chen Feifei? Yes. Just didn't make it public? Yes. Then did Chen Feifei tacitly agree to this? What did he mean? I mean, you unilaterally want to break off the engagement with her, or did she agree? Of course she agreed. He said it seriously, but Shi Mingwan didn't really believe him. This matter had always been a thorn in her heart. She couldn't believe him so easily. Seeing that she didn't speak, Jean Hausa lowered his head and was about to kiss her again. Shi Mingwan didn't give him a chance. She stubbornly pressed her hand against his chest. Since that's the case, then wait until the news of you breaking off the engagement is made public before you get together. Jean Hausa looked at the determination on her face and felt a headache coming on. You don't believe me? I can't find a reason to believe you. Shi Mingwan bit her lip. She looked at Jean Hausa with clear eyes, but there was a hint of sadness in them. Jean Hausa, I believed you time and time again. I don't want to believe you now. Jean Hausa looked at the anger on her face. So what do you mean now? Nothing. Shi Mingwan waved his hand away. When can you get Chen Feifei to publicly stand up and admit to breaking off the engagement? I'll consider getting back together with you. The word she used was consider. Even though Jean Hausa had revealed his identity like this, she had to think more after calming down. Where was this? This was Rong City. Not to mention that it was 108,000 miles away from Lin City. It would take a few hours to get to Qing City. Jean Hausa publicly announced their relationship in Rong City. On the surface, it looked like he was finally willing to give her an open identity. But what was the truth? After returning to Lin City, he could still continue to be Chen Feifei's fiancée. And as long as the engagement wasn't broken off, she would still be a shameful mistress who couldn't see the light of day. She was calm enough and rational enough now. She didn't want to believe Jean Hausa's words anymore. Even if at that moment Jean Hausa, who brought her to the public, made her heart beat so much that she wanted to throw everything away and follow him. But that was all. She wouldn't believe him anymore. Her heart was already cold. Her expression was determined. At this moment, Jean Hausa understood that what she said was true. Wanwan, it's getting late. I'll go downstairs first. Shi Mingwan retreated from his arms, lowered her head and picked up the small coat on the ground. Wanwan, don't go. He went to pull her hand. After not seeing her for a while, he didn't believe that she didn't miss him. Jean Hausa. Shi Mingwan gently pulled his hand away. You know what I want. If you can't give it to me, don't come looking for me again. After saying this, Shi Mingwan left without looking back. Chen Feifei looked at Jean Hausa in front of her. After not seeing him for a few months, he seemed to be different again. However, she really wasn't in the mood to care about how Jean Hausa was doing. Brother Hao, you came back at the right time. I'm in trouble. What? Jean Hausa was about to say that the Qin Corporation had been on the right track recently and asked Chen Feifei to publicly break off the engagement with him. However, her words made him stop for a moment. No matter what the reason was, when Chen Feifei was in trouble, he would help her. Qin Jie's mother is here. Jean Hausa was stunned for a few seconds before he remembered who Qin Jie was. He was Qin Yongchang's illegitimate child outside. He would be following Qin Yongchang and Qin Yongchang to retire in a small town in Canada. His mother? After Jean Hausa found out about Qin Jie, he specially checked his mother's information. According to the information, the other party took care of Qin Jie for a period of time after giving birth to him. Later, for some unknown reason, she left on her own. As for where she went, the information didn't find it. At that time, Jean Hausa didn't care about this. Therefore, he didn't continue to investigate. Is there a problem? The woman surnamed Liang is Qin Jie's mother. I don't know where she got a will made by my father, but she said that the Qin Corporation belongs to Qin Jie. Although Chen Feifei said this, she knew very well that the will was real. Qin Yongchang really wrote such a will, and he really planned to give the Qin Corporation to Qin Jie. When Chen Feifei thought of this, she felt upset. Oh. Jean Hausa was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect Qin Yongchang to have such a trick up his sleeve. All of it? Yes. All of it, all of the Qin Corporation's shares. They all belong to Qin Jie. When Chen Feifei said this, she sneered. And I can get all of the real estate and funds under his name. It looked like a lot, but in reality, compared to the Qin clan, it was just a small sorcerer meeting a great sorcerer. She really didn't expect her good father to be so biased. The father-daughter relationship of more than 20 years seemed to be fake now. You've checked it all? Is it true? Chen Feifei didn't answer, so it was a definite answer. She looked at Jean Hausa, and a flash of ruthlessness flashed in her eyes. Brother Hao, you know that I absolutely can't watch the Qin Corporation fall into that person's hands. Zhang Hao's hand unconsciously knocked on the table, and he suddenly raised his head. Don't be anxious. The Qin Corporation is still yours. It won't be anyone else's. Brother Hao, do you have a solution? Of course. Zhang Haoza expressed his opinion. Let's not talk about the fact that uncle is still alive. The will only take effect when he dies. Even if there really is this will, it doesn't matter. Just ask your father to write another one. Will my father be willing? Qin Feifei sneered. He gave the company to Qin Jie. Will he be willing to write another one? No wonder although he was unwilling at first he still went to Canada later. So he was waiting for her here. He wants to give the company to Qin Jie, but he needs Qin Jie to be alive to spend it, right? Zhang Haoza looked at Qin Feifei. Let my people take Qin Jie away and hide him for a few days. If your father really cares about him that much, he will naturally agree to write a new one. When the time comes we can just go to the court. Won't everything be fine? Then what if my father writes another one? The legal effect of a will was based on the last will before a person died. Qin Yongchang could write another one. Then if Qin Jie was safe he could also write another one. Zhang Haoza looked at Qin Feifei and thought of Zhang Kuan. It's not difficult. Let the doctor write a certificate to prove that he is insane. Then no matter how many wills he writes later they will be invalid. What's more, I don't intend to let him write another will. Then Brother Hao I'll let him write the equity transfer agreement directly. Zhang Haoza sneered. The Qin Corporation still belongs to your father now. Let him transfer all the property under his name to you. By then the property will already be under your name. What's the use of his will? This move was extremely ruthless. Qin Feifei didn't expect it. She looked at Zhang Haoza and suddenly smiled. Good idea. If possible, send the woman surnamed Liang to accompany my father. As for Qin Jie, let him be with them for a while. This meant that he wanted to use Qin Jie as a hostage. Zhang Haoza nodded. Okay, I'll get someone to arrange it. Thank you, Brother Hao. You're welcome. I came here to look for you for something. What? Issue a statement to break off the engagement with me. Qin Feifei was stunned for a moment. The 3-month period had actually passed long ago, but Zhang Haoza's name was too useful, so she had forgotten about it for a moment. TSK. I thought you'd forgotten. How could I forget such an important matter? In fact, he really forgot. He thought that it would be fine as long as they all reached an agreement. However, he didn't expect Shi Mingwan to care so much about this matter. He had no choice but to come personally to resolve this matter. Brother Hao, do you dislike me that much? You won't give me a chance at all? She was a little resentful. No matter what, she had grown up with him, but their relationship was actually so indifferent. It really made her sad. Feifei, all right. Qin Feifei shook her head. I'm so good. It's not like no one wants me. But Brother Hao, since the right to break off the engagement is in my hands, you shouldn't mind what excuse I use, right? I don't mind. This was what he had promised Qin Feifei back then. However, if Zhang Haoza knew what Qin Feifei said later, it would make things difficult for him. He probably wouldn't think that way now. Shi Mingwan didn't expect that she would be able to see Zhang Haoza so soon this time. She thought that after she made that request last time, it would take a long time for Zhang Haoza to appear. After all, Qin Feifei seemed to like Zhang Haoza so much, so how could she easily agree to break off the engagement? Therefore, after Su Qingsang's 1-month celebration for the twins, she played in Rong City for 2 more days. Under Su Qingsang's persuasion, she promised her that if Zhang Haoza couldn't run away to marry her and get married, she wouldn't be with Zhang Haoza. It wasn't that Su Qingsang didn't believe Zhang Haoza, but she really felt that her good friend was a woman who was blinded by love. Otherwise, why would she be single for a big brother from more than 10 years ago? Shi Mingwan didn't expect that as soon as she entered the door and put down her luggage, Zhang Haoza would come. Zhang Haoza returned to Lin City earlier than Shi Mingwan. As soon as he came back, he went to find Qin Feifei to resolve the engagement. He didn't expect Qin Feifei to be in trouble. He used a day to arrange the arrangements and send Qin Jie away. Then he asked someone to send Qin Jie's mother, who had come to cause trouble for Qin Feifei, to Canada to accompany Qin Yongchang. Now that the people who were watching Qin Yongchang had already obtained the transfer certificate, the next step was to take it to justice. Qin Feifei officially took control of the Qin Corporation. After he finished all these things it seemed like a lot, but it only took him 2 days. Once he was done he asked Qin Feifei to announce the news. Qin Feifei said that the Qin Corporation happened to have a press conference tomorrow. She would announce it at the press conference. Zhang Haoza's matter had been resolved. He didn't want to delay any longer. He directly came to look for Shi Mengwan. When Shi Mengwan saw Zhan Haoze at this moment, her emotions were a little complicated. Tomorrow, Qin Feifei will hold a press conference to announce the annulment of the engagement with me. Before she was about to ask Zhan Haoze to leave, Zhan Haoze said this in advance. Shi Mengwan was stunned. She blinked and looked at Zhan Haoze in front of her. What did you say? I said, tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. Qin Feifei will hold a press conference to announce the annulment of the engagement with me. As he spoke, he took a step inside. Shi Mengwan was shocked by his words. Subconsciously, she took a step back and let him in. Zhan Haoze came in and reached out to pull Shi Mengwan into his arms. He hugged her tightly, lowered his head and searched for her lips. This time, Shi Mengwan didn't push him away. Instead, she let him kiss her. She blinked and looked at the enlarged face in front of her. For a moment, she thought that she was hallucinating, but she knew that Zhan Haoze wouldn't joke about such a thing. If it was true, didn't that mean that she could be with him openly in the future? Thinking of this, Shi Mengwan's eyes actually felt a little sore and swollen. Zhan Haoze kissed her very gently. From her lips, to her cheeks, to her earlobes. Her eyelids. He kissed her bit by bit and took off her clothes bit by bit. Shi Mengwan didn't push him away. She reached out and hooked her arms around his neck. If she was more honest with herself, she would admit that she missed him too. She missed him very much. Even if she pushed him away 100 times, 1,000 times. When he got close to her again, she would still think about being with him. That was the contract they had made since they were young. Tears welled up at the corners of her eyes and were kissed by him. His kiss fell on her like a feather. She closed her eyes and trembled with his movements. This night was exceptionally long, but it also seemed exceptionally short. Shi Mengwan was very tired, very tired. But even though she was so tired and had something on her mind, she still woke up early the next day. Yesterday, she didn't have much interaction with Zhan Haoze. But after making love, Zhan Haoze still explained a little to her. Qin Feifei had once done him a favor and he wanted to repay her. So he agreed to some of her conditions. She wanted to ask what kind of favor it was, but Zhan Haoze didn't continue. Since you're so energetic, why don't we do it again? The memories made her blush. When she woke up, the first thing she did was to pick up her phone. At 9:30 p.m., the Qin Corporation held a press conference as expected. Not only did Lin City TV station come to interview, but there was also a live broadcast on the internet. Chapter 704. Qin Feifei's delicate image was completely different from before. She was wearing a dark suit and delicate makeup. She looked much more capable and experienced than before. Behind her was a man and a woman who seemed to be her assistants. When Qin Feifei walked to the upper seat and sat down, a reporter wanted to ask her questions. She waved her hand and quickly grasped the home court. She only said two things. First, she had officially taken over the Qin Corporation from Qin Yongchang. As for Qin Yongchang, because of his health, he had already gone abroad to recuperate. No one cared about Qin Yongchang's physical condition. This was because Qin Feifei then mentioned two of the Qin Corporation's future plans. The audience applauded. They all knew that the new CEO couldn't be judged by his appearance. He finished talking about the company's development direction. Immediately, a reporter asked about Qin Feifei and Zhan Haoze. You've been engaged to President Zhan for a long time. When will the wedding be held? The reporter's words made Qin Feifei chuckle. My friend, don't ask this question next time. President Zhan and I have already broken off our engagement. So there won't be a wedding. What? The spotlights of the reporters below the stage were flashing non-stop, and a few reporters stood up to ask questions. Sorry. Qin Feifei smiled and signaled for the reporters to be quiet. My engagement with President Zhan was annulled a long time ago. For some reason, it hasn't been made public. Today is a good opportunity for me to make things clear to everyone. Next time, don't associate me with him again. Miss Qin, I heard that you and President Zhan are childhood sweethearts. May I ask why you broke off the engagement? Sorry, it's not convenient for me to disclose. Miss Qin, may I ask if President Zhan knows that you announced the annulment of the engagement today? Of course. Qin Feifei seemed to be in a difficult position. After all, he has been waiting for this day for a long time. Miss Qin, can you explain what you mean when you said that he has been waiting for this day for a long time? The reporters' questions came one after another. Qin Feifei avoided the important point and focused on the trivial. Because his heart belongs to someone else. Qin Feifei suddenly exclaimed, Sorry. He was wrong. Actually, it's because we don't get along. Although we've been childhood sweethearts for so many years, we're only siblings. Please don't misunderstand and don't overthink it. After saying this, Qin Feifei left the press conference under the protection of security. However, her last two sentences were obviously a blatant lie. The reporters had caught a big scoop. Shi Mingwan didn't see the second half of the press conference. She only saw Zhang Haoze return when Qin Feifei said, "I'm sorry, President Zhang and I have already broken off our engagement." She heard it. Zhang Haoze naturally heard it too. Shi Mingwan put down her phone and looked at Zhang Haoze. Suddenly she felt a little unreal. Did they really break off the engagement? So simple? Was it that easy? What she had imagined and thought was very difficult was solved so easily. She blinked her eyes and stared blankly at Zhang Haoze approaching the bed. He sat down in front of her, looked at her dazed expression and reached out to caress her cheek. "Do you believe me now?" Shi Mingwan bit her lip. She didn't know what she could say. How did you do it? Doesn't Qin Feifei love him very much? How could he be willing to break off the engagement? I did her a favor. Zhang Haoze reached out and pulled her into his arms. He lowered his head and gently kissed the top of her hair. Shi Mingwan let him kiss her and felt her heart beating a little fast. She wanted to cry but she also wanted to laugh. Was the matter resolved just like that? 1-1. Zhang Haoze straightened her shoulder and looked at her slightly red eyes. "Now, can you promise to be my girlfriend?" His eyes and brows were gentle. The face in front of her overlapped with the youth from back then. Shi Mingwan couldn't resist this face, nor could she resist his gentleness. She nodded heavily and threw herself into his arms. Shi Mingwan brought the dishes to the dining table, and Zhang Haoze set up the bowls. When the two of them looked at each other, there was a faint smile in each other's eyes. When they sat down, Shi Mingwan took the soup that Zhang Haoze scooped for her. At this moment she thought that she had returned to the time when they were in the small bungalow. In the 2 days since Qin Feifei and Zhang Haoze announced that they were breaking off their engagement, Shi Mingwan had been with Zhang Haoze. Other than occasionally going out to deal with business, he spent most of his time with her. This made her especially satisfied. After dinner, the two of them found a movie and snuggled up on the sofa to watch it. Shi Mingwan had thought of going to the cinema with Zhang Haoze to experience the feeling of a date. However, every time she had to go out and see such a big scene, she didn't want to go out with Zhang Haoze at all. It was too exaggerated. To Zhang Haoze, this kind of movie was very boring. He would rather do something else. However, Shi Mingwan was very interested in watching it. He was so bored that he could only play with her fingers. Shi Mingwan pulled her hand back and he went to grab it again. Her hands were well maintained, but because she had been drawing for many years, there was a thin, extremely light layer of calluses where her fingers held the pen. He felt a little heartache when he saw it. He held her hand and brought it to his lips to kiss it. This kind of interference made Shi Mingwan unable to continue watching the movie. She pulled her hand back. "Stop fooling around." Zhang Haoze stopped playing with her hand and turned to wrap his arms around her waist. He watched as she took the exquisite collarbone. He lowered his head and kissed it. Shi Mingwan pushed his head again. "I said stop fooling around." Just as they were about to reach the climax, the male and female leads broke up because of a misunderstanding. Zhang Haoze kissed the top of her head instead. 1-1, come back to Qing City with me." Shi Mingwan was watching attentively when she suddenly heard this. She turned around and glanced at Zhang Haoze. "Zhang Haoze. Come back to Qing City with me," Zhang Haoze said very seriously. "I've been busy for the past few days. Most of the business focus has been shifted over. In the next few days, Qing City will be the main focus. 1-1, I hope you can come to Qing City with me." Shi Mingwan was silent. Before Zhang Haoze broke off the engagement, she had thought about how they would continue their path if she could be with Zhang Haoze openly one day. She had also considered what Zhang Haoze said about going with him. For example, didn't Su Qingsang also marry out of town? However, it was one thing to have this plan in mind, and it was another thing to actually have this day come. "I need to think about it." "What else do you need to think about?" Shi Mingwan didn't know what to say. Now that she was in Lin City, it would only take her 2 hours to return to her home. But if she went to Qing City, she would be even further away from her parents. She originally wanted to bring her parents to Lin City, but they weren't willing. In 2 years, when Shi Mingru was admitted to a school in another city, her parents wouldn't even have a companion by their side. "If you're worried about your parents, you can bring them to Qing City. I have a lot of businesses in Qing City. When the time comes, they can choose any place to live. My parents won't go with me. No matter how small the town was, it was still their own home. No matter how good Qing City was, it was still someone else's place. If your parents don't want to go, I can hire someone to take care of them. That's not necessary. They're in good health now. My dad is still working in the fields every day. Shi Mingwan looked at Zhang Haoze and thought of something else. Let's go back to town tomorrow to see my parents, okay? Mother Shi had some misunderstandings about Zhang Haoze, although it wasn't a misunderstanding. However, if she really wanted to go to Qing City with Zhang Haoze, she still had to get her parents to agree. Okay. Zhang Haoze nodded. I should visit your parents. Don't worry, I'll do my best. I'm afraid it won't be easy for my mother. Shi Mingwan didn't mind reminding him. Don't forget you have a criminal record. Zhang Haoze also thought of it. He picked up Shi Mingwan's body and hugged her in his arms. Criminal record? Is it that serious? Isn't it? Shi Mingwan raised an eyebrow. You have a fiancé. She reached out and tapped Zhang Haoze's chest. Thinking about it this way, I'm really at a disadvantage. Perhaps I should get a fiancé too. 1-1. Zhang Haoze didn't like such a suggestion. This joke isn't funny. I think it's pretty good. Shi Mingwan looked serious. After all, I haven't seen many other men, so she couldn't say the rest. Zhang Haoze would allow anything else, but to let Shi Mingwan see other men? Dream on. Shi Mingwan was just casually saying it. How could she really go see other men? Now that Zhang Haoze kissed her until she couldn't breathe, she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him instead. This kiss slowly changed its flavor. Shi Mingwan was right. In Shi Mingwan's heart, Zhang Haoze was a man with a criminal record. It was obvious from the fact that she kept arranging blind dates for her daughter. To Shi Mingwan, the son-in-law she wanted to find for her daughter didn't need to be rich or capable. There was only one requirement: to be good to her daughter and make her happy. Zhang Haoze, who had a fiancé before, was obviously not within her consideration. Therefore, when she saw Zhang Haoze follow Shi Mingwan into the door with his hands full of gifts, not only was there no smile on his face, but he was also very gloomy. 1-1. Shi Mingwan and Zhang Haoze stayed together in Lin City for a few days. It wasn't until Zhang Haoze received a call that he was going back to Qing City. There were a lot of things waiting for Zhang Haoze to deal with in Qing City, but he stayed with her in Shi Mingwan's small apartment in Lin City. Tang Hua and Zhang Yang didn't say it out loud, but they were already complaining in their hearts. One had to know that although the Zhan family was suppressed to the point that they couldn't raise their heads, Zhan Lai wasn't dead yet. Zhan Lai's wife, Bai Shuqiao, also had a good family background. Now that the two of them and their two sons were locked up under surveillance, how could the Bai family be willing to accept this? They had come to their door a few times, although they were all blocked. However, the Bai family had roughly guessed something and had been up to a lot of small tricks recently. Those small tricks couldn't stop Zhang Haoze, but they still had to wait for Zhang Haoze to return to Qing City before they dealt with Zhan Lai and Bai Shuqiao. Zhang Haoze didn't tell Shi Mingwan about these things. He only told Shi Mingwan before he went to bed last night that if possible, he wanted to visit the Shi family's parents as soon as possible. Shi Mingwan didn't hesitate. Since she had already decided to be with Zhang Haoze, then it was a very necessary step to bring Zhang Haoze to meet his parents. Shi Mingwan also knew that Zhang Haoze had a fiancé that wouldn't be over so quickly with Mother Shi. Therefore, she was already mentally prepared when she came all the way here. Afraid that she would scare Mother Shi, Shi Mingwan resolutely didn't allow Zhang Haoze to bring his convoy to town. So now there were only the two of them. Hearing Mother Shi call her, she touched Zhang Haoze's arm. Before they came, they had agreed that Zhang Haoze would perform today. Including how to explain it to Mother Shi, it was all his business. Hello, Auntie. Zhang Haoze handed over the gifts in his hands. The smile on his face was a little fawning. These are gifts for Auntie and Uncle. I don't want them. Mother Shi didn't even look at them. She even took a step back. I can't accept Mr. Zhan's gift. Zhang Haoze held the bags in both hands. He didn't feel awkward standing there. How can Auntie not accept it? I'm with Wanwan, so you're my elder. There's nothing I can't accept. Stop. Mother Shi's expression changed when she heard his words. What did you say? You're with Wanwan? Even though she was already mentally prepared when she saw them appear together, Mother Shi's expression still changed when she heard this. Yes. Zhang Haoze openly admitted. Wanwan and I had a misunderstanding before. Now that the misunderstanding has been resolved, we're back together. Misunderstanding? Mother Shi sneered and remained unmoved. Is having a fiancé also a misunderstanding? Zhang Haoze was a little embarrassed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Auntie, I've already resolved this matter. Resolved? Oh. Mother Shi's attitude seemed to be good. Zhang Haoze gained some courage. I've already broken off the engagement. Shi Mingwan nodded at the side as if to prove it to Zhang Haoze. Unfortunately, Mother Shi wasn't moved at all. Really? When did it end? Last week. Mother Shi didn't say anything. Zhang Haoze just stood in the yard with the gifts in his hands. Shi Mingwan was afraid that he would get tired after carrying it for a long time, so she gave him a look and told him to put it down. Zhang Haoze shook his head at her gently. Mother Shi didn't miss their small movements at all. She looked at Shi Mingwan and suddenly spoke. 1-1. President Zhang said that he broke off the engagement? Is this true? Yes. Then how do you know that he really broke it off? What if he's lying to your face and deceiving you? Mom? Shi Mingwan felt that Mother Shi had really watched too much TV. How is that possible? He held a press conference and appeared on TV about breaking off the engagement. Really? Of course. Shi Mingwan quickly nodded. Mom, don't worry. His engagement is really broken off. Mother Shi wanted to say something else, but Zhang Haoze handed the gift in his hand forward at the right time. And believe me, I'm really single now. I don't have an engagement and I don't have a girlfriend. I'm also serious about Mingwan. With her guarantee, Mother Shi felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't remember what it was. In the end, she didn't hit a smiling person. She waved her hand and called Zhang Haoze into the house. The few of them had been standing in the yard talking just now. Fortunately, it was busy farming now, so there weren't many people. Otherwise, people might gossip if they saw them. Shi Mingwan blinked at Zhang Haoze. This meant that she had passed. Zhang Haoze smiled and the two of them entered the door. Mother Shi looked at the time. Your dad has gone to the fields and will be back soon for dinner. You guys sit for a while. I'll go buy some vegetables. Mom, I'll go with you. No need. Mother Shi tapped Shi Mingwan's forehead. If you want to come back next time, let me know in advance. Since her son-in-law came to visit, she had to entertain him well. Even this child didn't say a word. Mom, we're all family. There's no need to stand on ceremony with him. Mother Shi's reaction was to glare at her, then turn around and go out. Shi Mingwan looked at Zhang Haoze and suddenly smiled. It was as if she didn't expect to pass so easily. Zhang Haoze was a little worried just now, but now he relaxed. Look, nothing happened at all. On the way here, Shi Mingwan had been very worried. Along the way, she thought about what he would do if Mother Shi made things difficult for him. I'm fine because my mother loves me. Shi Mingwan's face was full of pride. Do you think it's because of you? My mother loves me, so she won't make things difficult for you. Yes. It was rare that Zhang Haoze didn't argue with Shi Mingwan. Your mother loves you. She also loves her son-in-law. Go away. Shi Mingwan hit him. Whose son-in-law are you? Don't randomly call me relatives. If I'm not your son-in-law, why did you bring me here? While the two of them were laughing, Father Shi returned. He suddenly saw that there was a man at home, and he was even holding hands with his daughter and standing together very intimately. His expression didn't look good for a moment. 1-1. Dad. Shi Mingwan quickly retracted her hand and took 2 steps forward. You're back? Yes. Father Shi nodded. Yes, I'm back. His trousers were still stained with mud from working in the field, and his face was a little black and red from the sun. At this moment, his gaze sized up Zhang Haoze. Hello, uncle. My name is Zhang Haoze. I'm Wanwan's boyfriend. Zhang Haoze went forward and introduced himself. It was his first time meeting his father-in-law, so he was under a lot of pressure. However, he was used to being cold. Even if he was nervous, it couldn't be seen on his face at all. Instead, he looked very calm and collected. Father Shi didn't look at him. Instead, he looked at Shi Mingwan. 1-1. When did this happen? Why haven't I heard of it at all? You didn't object when your mother said that she wanted to arrange a blind date for you, right? At that time, didn't you have a boyfriend? Dad, he's indeed my boyfriend. Zhang Haoze took another step forward and introduced himself again. At the same time, he reached out to shake Father Shi's hand. How long have you known each other? Father Shi didn't even look at that hand and only looked at Shi Mingwan. We've known each other for a long time. Shi Mingwan's words made Father Shi raise his eyebrows again. Known each other for a long time? Then why are you still going on a blind date? Shi Mingwan didn't expect Father Shi to catch the main point with one sentence. She chuckled. Although we've known each other for a long time, we've only been together recently. That's why we're going on a blind date. Is that so? Father Shi didn't say anything and just stared at Zhang Haoze. His looks were not bad and he looked like a decent person. Even if Father Shi hadn't seen the world before, he knew that the suit wasn't cheap. Logically speaking, he should be happy to have such a son-in-law. But father sure couldn't be happy. He looked at his daughter, who was as beautiful as a flower. No matter how he looked at it, Jean Hauser looked like a pig who came to steal his cabbage. He was inexplicably unhappy. Hence, he chose to ignore Jean Hauser's extended hand. This atmosphere was really a little awkward. However, Jean Hauser's heart was unusually strong. If Father Sure didn't shake hands with him, he would calmly retract his hand. As for Shi Mingwan's gaze, he even patted the back of her hand in a place where Father Sure couldn't see. The two of them exchanged flirtatious glances, didn't escape Father Sure's eyes. He looked at Jean Hauser even more differently. At this moment, no matter what Shi Mingwan said, he didn't say anything. He just stood there and stared at Jean Hauser. When he saw Shi Mingwan smiling sweetly at him, he suddenly had the urge to hit someone. Very soon Mother Shi returned. She went into the kitchen and asked Father Shi to take a shower before coming out. No matter what, it was Jean Hauser's first time visiting. It was really inappropriate for him to stand next to his future son-in-law in such a muddy state. Father Shi felt the disdain in Mother Shi's mouth, and his mood was a little complicated. When he looked at Jean Hauser again, he was even more displeased. However, he had to listen to his wife's words. Father Shi obediently went to take a shower. Thus, one went into the kitchen and the other went back to the room. Only Jean Hauser and Shi Mingwan were left in the living room. "I'm sorry. My dad has never seen you before." Shi Mingwan didn't even believe what she said. She didn't know why her father had such great hostility when he saw Jean Hauser for the first time. "It's okay. I understand." Jean Hauser nodded. "If we have a daughter in the future and another man wants to marry her, I won't be happy either." Being unhappy was light. It was even possible for him to fight with him. "TSK, who wants to have a daughter with you?" Shi Mingwan smiled and patted him. In just a short while Shi Mingru returned. Compared to Father Shi and Mother Shi, Shi Mingru was the only one who had a good expression towards Jean Hauser. "Brother-in-law? Can I call you brother-in-law?" Shi Mingru's words caused Father Shi and Mother Shi to object at the same time. "No." "But isn't he sister's boyfriend? He's not married, so why are you calling him brother-in-law?" Father Shi glared at his little daughter who was siding with an outsider. "Call him Mr. Jean. Mingru, right? You can call me Brother Jean." Jean Hauser smiled and tried to smooth things over. He was handsome and he looked imposing. Shi Mingru was 13 years old, the age of naughtiness. "Okay, Brother Jean." She didn't know how to be polite at all. "You're so handsome. What do you do?" "I start a small company." Jean Hauser said it very modestly. The corners of Shi Mingwan's mouth twitched. XM was also called a small company? Hee. Really? What company? XM, Jean Hauser answered casually. Shi Mingru nodded. However, a few seconds later she suddenly exclaimed. She took out her phone and swiped it a few times. Finally, she looked up at Jean Hauser with a shocked expression. Chapter 705. As soon as he said this, the other three people present all looked at Jean Hauser. Especially Mother Shi and Father Shi's gazes changed. "Mingru, what are you talking about?" Shi Mingwan looked at her sister. Even if Jean Hauser had a fiancée, he didn't say that. Shi Mingru pouted and turned the phone to face her parents. "I didn't say anything wrong. It was written on the news." Shi Mingwan wouldn't have known about this. However, their classmates were playing a game that was produced by XM Company. One had to know that XM Company's games were very popular. Fire one after another. The Universe player that recently came out had a lot of students in their school playing it. Although Shi Mingru didn't play games, her classmates were playing them. She had only played it a few times. After that, she felt that it was a waste of time and stopped playing. However, on the day that she uninstalled the game, she happened to see the news. Although Jean Hauser and Chen Feifei weren't celebrities, XM's achievements were too eye-catching. Especially the Universe player game, which had been ranked first in the download rankings for months in a row. Hence, players would naturally pay attention to it. For ordinary players, even if they knew that Jean Hauser abandoned his fiancée because he had a mistress, so what? It was fine as long as the game was fun. Because of this, Shi Mingru often argued with her classmates. She felt that she didn't want to use a product developed by a company with a bad character. There was nothing she could do. The children raised by Father Shi and Mother Shi were so stubborn. Therefore, when she heard the familiar name of Jean Hauser and thought of XM, she immediately took out her phone to look for news. This matter was a little too big. One had to know that unlike Tianyu Group and Li Corporation, which operated in traditional industries, XM mainly focused on gaming and was very well known among young people. Jean Hauser used to be very mysterious, but ever since he got engaged to Qin Feifei, he was considered a celebrity in Lin City because of his handsome looks. However, the way Shi Mengru looked at Zhang Haoze now was not very appreciative. Although she was young, she had a strong sense of right and wrong. She was afraid that Mother Shi wouldn't be able to see it clearly, so she specially enlarged the phone for her parents to see. "Dad, Mom, look. It's not me, it's the news." It had been less than a week since Zhang Haoze and Qin Feifei broke off the engagement. It was still considered a hot news. He searched online and found a bunch of reports. Of course, many of these reports were not true. But no one cared if it was real or not. That day Qin Feifei wanted to say it, but she was too shy. Her half-hearted attitude showed that she had explained it clearly. In fact, it made all the reporters in Lin City imagine a drama. Every media outlet even wrote different content. Yet there were people who believed it. For example, the news on a certain website was, "Zhang Haoze likes the new and dislikes the old, abandons his childhood sweetheart." Only Qing Mei was left to support the Qin Corporation. For example, a well-known magazine wrote, "Why did XM abandon its childhood sweetheart?" Little San's identity was mysterious, and his background was a mystery. But one thing was for sure, and that was that she was definitely more powerful than Qin Feifei. There were also other kinds of news. That was about it. These few days, Shi Mengwan and Zhang Haoze only cared about being together. As for this news, because Zhang Haoze had promised Qin Feifei that she could say whatever she wanted, Tang Hua and the others knew about it, but no one came to tell Zhang Haoze. More importantly, Tang Hua and the others didn't take this matter seriously. Compared to the Zhang family's matter, a small piece of news would naturally be suppressed in 2 days. Therefore, not only did Shi Mengwan not know, but Zhang Haoze also didn't know that he had become a news figure. While Shi Mengru was speaking, Shi Mengwan also picked up her phone and flipped through the news. With this, her expression became a little subtle. The moment she finished reading the news, Father Shi and Mother Shi also finished reading it. The 4 members of the Shi family didn't say anything at this moment. Their gazes were extremely interested as they looked at Zhang Haoze. "Zhang Haoze, Auntie, Uncle, this matter actually, Mr. Zhang? I'm sorry." Mother Shi spoke first. In this family she definitely had a position. "Cheetah isn't a match. Our Wanwan isn't a match for Mr. Zhang. So, Mr. Zhang, please." There was no way for villagers to chase people away in the middle of a meal. This was too humiliating. But Mother Shi actually did such a rude thing. "That's right." Father Shi glared at Zhang Haoze coldly. He was already dissatisfied with the man who was going to marry his daughter, and now he was even more dissatisfied. "Mr. Zhang, if you're not confused, please." Shi Mengru blinked and suddenly stopped talking. Shi Mengwan looked at her family and finally looked at Zhang Haoze. "I'm a mistress?" Because of his relationship with a mistress, he broke off the engagement with Qin Feifei? That's what the news meant, right? "Wanwan, you know you're not." "I don't know." Shi Mengwan only hated herself for not seeing this news earlier. If she had seen it earlier, she definitely wouldn't have brought Zhang Haoze back. "I only found out now." "Wanwan," Qin Feifei announced that she broke off the engagement. "You know about it, right?" "Yes." Zhang Haoze couldn't deny it. He did know about it. "She said that you broke off the engagement with her because you had a third party. You know about it too, right?" "I didn't know." Zhang Haoze shook his head. "I just said that she could find any excuse she wanted." However, Zhang Haoze didn't expect Qin Feifei to find such an excuse. Zhang Haoze met the gazes of the 2 elders of the Shi family and felt a little awkward. But the most important thing right now was Shi Mengwan. He absolutely had no intention of making her a mistress. "Wanwan." Shi Mengwan turned around and didn't listen to Zhang Haoze's explanation. She looked at Father Shi and Mother Shi. "Dad, Mom, this isn't what you think." The press conference and Qin Feifei saying that she was a mistress could be explained slowly. But now she needed her parents' support. "Wanwan." Mother Shi didn't expect Shi Mengwan to still speak up for Zhang Haoze at this time. Father Shi's face turned green. "Alright, stop talking. I won't agree to you guys being together. Mr. Zhang, you should leave." "Dad." Shi Mengwan wanted to say something, but Father Shi raised his hand and didn't listen to her at all. "Don't call me. I'll say it again. I won't agree to you guys being together. Let him go. This isn't Haoze's fault." Shi Mengwan stood up. She didn't believe that her parents would be so unreasonable. "Besides, I know about this." "You know?" Father Shi stood up and looked at her angrily. "What do you know? What do you know?" It's a fact that this man has a fiancée, right? Did you get together with him when he had a fiancée? Is that right? Tell me." "That is not what you think." Then what is it? Father Shi had been straightforward all his life. Although he and Mother Shi couldn't be said to be rich, they were quite strict in educating their daughter. Especially after Shi Mingwan ran away from home for more than a year. After she came back, Father Shi and Mother Shi's concept of parenting changed. Let me ask you, did he get together with you when he had a fiancée? Shi Mingwan was speechless. Zhan Haoze stood up as well. Uncle, this isn't Wanwan's fault. It's my fault. I didn't deal with my own problems in time. You can't blame Wanwan for this. Of course it's your fault. Father Shi said bluntly. But you're no one to me. I don't want to see you now. I'm just educating my daughter. You, he pointed at Shi Mingwan. If you still recognize me as your father, then break up with this. Dad. Shi Mingwan was speechless. She had waited so long for Zhan Haoze to break off the engagement. She could be with him openly and honestly. The process wasn't very smooth and it wasn't beautiful either. But wasn't it fine as long as the result was good? Uncle. Don't call me that. I can't afford it. Father Shi's temper flared up. He pointed in the direction of the door. Don't force me to make a move. Zhan Haoze stood there with an extremely awkward expression on his face. Other than the Zhan family, it had been a long time since anyone had given him a hard time. Uncle. Wanwan and I truly love each other. You truly love each other? Since you and Wanwan truly love each other, why are you engaged to another woman? Dad. When had Shi Mingwan ever seen Zhan Haoze like this? She couldn't help but want to say a few words for him. Haoze and Qin Feifei got engaged because they— Shut up. I'll settle your problem with you later. Father Shi only stared at Zhan Haoze. Now get out of my house. Dad. If you talk again I'll chase you out too. Father Shi's words made Shi Mingwan not dare to speak again. She stood there, not planning to let it go just like that. She still wanted to say more. Zhan Haoze saw that she wanted to argue with Father Shi. He reached out and patted her shoulder, then glanced at her. He signaled for her to stop talking. Uncle, Auntie. It doesn't matter if you don't want to see me now. I can leave first. But there's one thing I want you to understand. I'm sincere about Wanwan. Without saying anything more, Zhan Haoze actually left just like that. Shi Mingwan's toes moved and she almost chased after him again. This action made Father Shi's expression even uglier. Sister. Shi Mingru hadn't said anything. Seeing that things had developed to this point, she quickly tugged at Shi Mingwan's sleeve. Her parents were angry now, so it was better for her not to make them angry. Mother Shi couldn't bear it. She wanted to say something, but seeing her daughter like this, she didn't say anything in the end. Father Shi looked at Shi Mingwan, who was still standing there motionlessly, and slammed the table hard. Why are you still standing? You don't want to eat any more, do you? Shi Mingwan knew that her father was angry, so she didn't plan to go against him. She obediently sat down. In rural houses, meals were eaten in the living room. Shi Mingwan and Zhan Haoze were sitting with their backs facing the door. When she stood up, her view of the outside was also blocked. The moment she sat down, Shi Mingru saw that Zhan Haoze hadn't left yet. She quickly blinked at her sister. Shi Mingwan was about to turn around when Father Shi slammed the table again. You can't even eat in peace, right? Shi Mingwan didn't turn around. She had roughly guessed it. Mother Shi also saw it, but she didn't say anything. Father Shi didn't like Zhan Haoze now. Seeing that he didn't leave, he shouted outside. Don't try to hurt yourself. It's useless for you to stand there. Leave my house. You're not welcome in our house. Zhan Haoze stood there, but he had no intention of leaving at all. Father Shi almost couldn't help but get up and chase Zhan Haoze out of the courtyard. Mother Shi tugged at his sleeve, so he had no choice but to sit back down. Shi Mingwan heaved a sigh of relief, but she didn't turn around to look. This place was close to Lin City, but it was south of Lin City. It was noon. Although it wasn't midsummer yet, the sun was very hot. Zhan Haoze just stood under the sun, showing no signs of leaving. Shi Mingwan didn't have much of an appetite. She casually ate 2 mouthfuls of rice, but in the end she still turned around to look at Zhan Haoze. As if sensing her gaze, Zhan Haoze also looked at her and even smiled at her. Father Shi slammed the table again. Shi Mingwan could only look away and lower her head to focus on eating. The child's father. Although it was noon, there weren't many people passing by. But in the countryside, it wasn't popular to close the door during the day when there were people at home. Zhan Haoze just stood in their courtyard like a thorn. If someone saw him, you don't want to eat in peace either, do you? It was rare for Father Shi to speak to his wife in a bad tone. Thus no one in the family spoke. After eating, Shi Mingru took the initiative to stand up and clean up the dishes. She winked at Shi Mengwan and quickly ran into the kitchen. Dad. Mom. Shi Mengwan didn't turn around to look outside. She only looked at her parents. John Hausa isn't what you think. Me and him aren't what you think either. Father sure didn't want to hear it. He wanted to chase John Hausa out now. Out of sight, out of mind. He stood up and was about to walk out when Shi Mengwan called out. Dad. John Hausa is dear brother. Father Shi's footsteps stopped there, and Mother Shi suddenly turned around to look at Shi Mengwan. Dad, Mom, John Hausa is that dear brother from back then. Father Shi and Mother Shi both knew about dear brother. Back then, when Shi Mengwan found him, she had nightmares for a long time at night. In her dreams she kept calling him dear brother, dear brother. For a period of time, Father Shi thought that she had a mental problem and wanted to take her to see a psychiatrist. However, they didn't know when Shi Mengwan stopped dreaming and stopped shouting at night. They thought that this matter was over. Father Shi even thought that the so-called dear brother was a character that Shi Mengwan had imagined herself. Otherwise, how could there be no news at all? However, Mother Shi didn't think that this matter was fake. When she heard her daughter mention this name back then, she knew that her daughter hadn't forgotten John Hausa. John Hausa is dear brother. Shi Mengwan added. She had never told her parents about what happened that year. She only briefly mentioned that she was saved by a dear brother and lived together for a year. However, there were many details and many interactions between the two of them that were the most precious and precious memories to her. She didn't want to tell anyone, not even her parents. If there's a first-come, first-served rule in a relationship, I'm not the third party. Shi Mengwan recounted what happened back then in a very low voice. After she finished speaking, she talked about the nightmare that completely separated her from her dear brother. Dear brother offended some people back then, so we met some bad people. When you found me, dear brother was gone. Actually, he was saved by Chen Feifei, the young lady of the Chen family, his former fiancée. John Hausa didn't tell Shi Mengwan about this part. She deduced it. The Chen family saved dear brother's life. He was a person who knew how to repay kindness. Especially Chen Feifei, who was in poor health and had heart disease. So when their family wanted the two of them to be together, dear brother agreed. But then we met again. Of course, Shi Mengwan wouldn't say that she never gave up and that she was the one who took the initiative to find John Hausa. Because dear brother owed the Chen family a favor, he agreed to let the woman propose to break off the engagement. I can probably understand why Chen Feifei thinks that way. After all, she needs a good reputation. These were also Shi Mengwan's speculations. But these were already close to the truth. Chen Feifei is a woman. She insists on saying this now. Don't tell me you want dear brother to confront her and refute her? She believed that even if John Hausa knew, he wouldn't do it. Firstly, the Chen family had done him a favor. Secondly, John Hausa looked cold, but he was definitely not stingy towards people who had no conflict of interest with him. At this point, Shi Mengwan looked up at her parents. That's how it is. It's up to you whether you believe it or not. I've never been a third party, and I believe that no one will mention this matter again after a while. People were forgetful. They weren't celebrities. More importantly, she was about to go to Qing City with John Hausa. Under such circumstances, how could she care about those rumors? Father Shi and Mother Shi were silent. After hearing Shi Mengwan's words, the two of them looked at each other. Now they looked at Shi Mengwan together. You said that John Hausa was the young man who saved you back then? Mother Shi's gaze changed a little. Her thinking was different from that of a man. To her, whoever saved her daughter was her savior. Yes. Shi Mengwan nodded. Dad, didn't you tell me that I have to repay kindness? Dear brother saved me, so he's my savior. Now that you've chased my savior out, you don't usually teach us like this, do you? Father Shi was stunned by Shi Mengwan and almost couldn't speak, but it was only for a moment. Don't go so far. Father Shi sneered. You said that he saved you? Then do you know how many injuries you had when we brought you back from the police? Do these injuries count as because of him? Shi Mengwan was speechless. Father Shi continued, yes, he saved you, but you just said that when you lived together, you cleaned, cooked, and washed for him. Does that count as you also helping him? Shi Mengwan was speechless. Her lips moved and she wanted to say something, but Father Shi spoke again. Alright, even if it was in the past, you said that he saved you, but you took care of his life. Is this considered even? You said that he also took care of you. He arranged a school for you and took care of you. Then it's also a fact that you were almost killed because of him, right? Does this count as a clean slate? But how could matters of the heart be calculated in such a way? The past matters are even. I'll talk about what happened after you two reunited. After you two reunited he was still with that Miss Chen, right? That's because, I don't care about the reason. I'm just asking you, is that right? When you two were together was he still related to that Miss Chen? Shi Mingwan's mouth opened and closed again. When she met Father Shi's eyes she couldn't give a negative answer. Let's take a step back. Alright, even if he wants to repay the favor, it's his business. It's his business to repay the debt of gratitude. What does it have to do with you? He dragged you down and made you bear the accusation of being a third party. Is that because of him? Are you going to suffer criticism because of him? We can, just tell me, isn't it? Shi Mingwan couldn't refute. Father Shi sneered. That's why you're saying so much now. You want me to agree to you two being together. Let me tell you, it's impossible. As long as he was around it was absolutely impossible. He would never agree to Zhan Haoze being together with Shi Mingwan. But Dad, I really like him. You really like him and really want to be with him. And then? Father Shi's gaze was sharp. Haven't you thought about what you'll face after you two really get together? He knocked on the table and his voice was much colder than before. Others won't care about his difficulties and won't think about what happened to him. Others will only know that he once had an engagement but it was broken off. And the reason it was broken off was because of you. No, and you have to bear the reputation of being a third party to be with him. Do you think that this matter will fade away after a long time? You're completely wrong. Actually, Father Shi didn't believe that Shi Mingwan hadn't thought of these things. But even if she had thought of them she probably wouldn't care. Because in Father Shi's opinion, she had already been blinded by her emotions. Let me tell you, if you really want to be with him, these things won't pass. Do you know? Shi Mingwan sat there without moving. Of course she knew. But she really didn't care that much. After waiting for more than 10 years she had been angry and desperate. Compared to that time the disappointment now was much lighter. She could finally be with her dear brother. She was more grateful. Moreover, she didn't think that this matter couldn't be changed. In short, I won't agree. As he spoke, Father Shi stood up and walked outside. He glared at Zhan Haoze, who was still standing in the courtyard. Mr. Zhan, our house is small and can't accommodate a great Buddha like you. Mr. Zhan, please move. Uncle. I said, don't call me uncle. I can't afford it. Please. As he spoke, he directly pushed Zhan Haoze. Zhan Haoze's skills were excellent, so he usually wouldn't be pushed out by Father Shi. Chapter 706. As soon as he turned around, he met Shi Mingwan's gaze and his face darkened. If you still recognize me as your father, I won't allow you to be with him. Dad. Shi Mingwan was about to faint. She couldn't help but turn to look at Mother Shi. Mom, look at Dad. She had wanted to stop Father Shi from chasing her away, but she didn't expect that she was still a beat too slow. She took a few steps forward and was about to open the door for Zhan Haoze. Father Shi stood at the door. He blocked the door and didn't give in at all. Don't open the door. Dad. Shi Mingwan was anxious. Seeing that the father and daughter were about to clash, Mother Shi quickly went forward to pull them apart. She said she was pulling them apart, but she was only trying to dissuade her daughter. Wan, you must be tired from the car ride all morning. You should go and rest first. Mother Shi winked at Shi Mingwan. Father Shi was in a fit of anger, so it was better not to face Father Shi head-on. But, before Shi Mingwan could finish speaking, she saw Father Shi snort and stand still facing the door. His attitude showed that he had no intention of stepping aside. Dad, Mom. Shi Mingwan had a headache. I still have to go back to Lin City to work. You guys aren't planning to lock me at home and not let me go out, are you? The studio is all your own. Take a few days off and treat it as staying at home with your mother and me. Father Shi looked at Shi Mingwan. Besides, don't think that I don't know that you can still work online. There are computers and Wi-Fi at home. You can just stay at home for the next few days. Dad, how can you do this? I'm already an adult. How can you restrict my personal freedom? I'm not trying to restrict you. I'm doing this for your own good. If you really recognize me as your father, then agree to break up with that Zhan guy. As long as you break up, I'll naturally let you go back. Dad, can you be more reasonable? Shi Mingwan didn't expect that after saying so much, she couldn't move Father Shi at all. She really didn't know what to do. I'm unreasonable? Let me tell you, I'm doing this for your own good. That Chen woman's family background is better than ours, right? That Zhan guy doesn't even like her. Do you think he can be loyal to you for the rest of his life? I believe him. Unfortunately, I don't believe it. Father Shi had the same opinion as Mother Shi in this regard. Since ancient times, it was only right for families of equal status to be matched. If the surname Jean could earn so much money and his conditions were so good, they were really not a good match. Dad, you haven't even interacted with him before, yet you're saying this. Aren't you being too arbitrary? Arbitrary? I'm being arbitrary and doing it for your own good. Father Shi's attitude was firm. Shi Mingwan was very helpless. After Shi Mingru washed the dishes and was about to go to school, Father Shi was still blocking the door and not letting Shi Mingwan go out. Shi Mingru stepped forward and looked at Father Shi with a fawning expression. Dad, it's fine if you block sister. I still have to go to school. Father Shi glanced at his little daughter and opened the door to let her go. John Hauser was still standing outside the door. When Shi Mingwan saw him, she moved her toes. However, before she could take a step out, Father Shi slammed the door shut again. He turned around and glared at Shi Mingwan. Don't even think about getting out today. I said it. Dad. Shi Mingwan really didn't know that her biological father had such a stubborn side. The sun in the courtyard was also very strong. Shi Mingwan's courtyard door was the kind of iron gate that could often be seen in the countryside. There was nothing to block it. The sun was so strong. Although Jean Hauser was a man, he wasn't afraid of the sun. However, Shi Mingwan's heart ached for him to stand outside the courtyard like this. Dad, just let him in. If there's anything, can't we just let him in and talk about it? He's just standing outside like this. Are you afraid that the neighbors will gossip when they see him? Gossip about what? Father Shi was stubborn. If he's afraid of being gossiped about, he can leave. If he doesn't stand there, won't no one gossip about him? Shi Mingwan felt a headache coming on. She looked at Father Shi and finally nodded. All right, let him stand. She turned around and walked into the house. Such an easy compromise stunned Father Shi for a moment, but he immediately became even more annoyed. He turned around and looked at Mother Shi. What is she doing? Throwing a tantrum at me? Losing her temper? What nonsense are you talking about? Mother Shi watched the father and daughter fight and was a little helpless. You're blocking her sweetheart outside, but you're not allowing her to have a little temper? She can't bear to see her sweetheart suffer, so she can let me, her father, suffer, right? Father Shi's words stunned Mother Shi for a moment, but she immediately reacted. She laughed. She was afraid that Jean Hauser, who was outside, would hear her, so her voice was very soft. Are you jealous? Father Shi's old face turned red. Who's jealous? Why isn't it jealousy? Mother Shi's smile became even brighter. She touched Father Shi's arm. You're unhappy that your daughter is about to run away with another man. Not to mention that your daughter is still thinking about protecting her sweetheart. She doesn't give you any face at all? What nonsense are you talking about? Father Shi was a little embarrassed. He glared at Mother Shi. Anyway, I don't like such a man. I don't agree. After saying this, he also entered the house. When he entered the house, he found that Shi Mingwan had actually returned to her room and ignored him. She didn't even think of saying anything nice. His face darkened. Shi Mingwan was in her room and looked at Jean Hauser downstairs from the window. Unfortunately, his body was blocked by the door, so she couldn't see it. After thinking for a moment, she took out her phone and sent him a message. The sun is shining. Go back to the car and sit down first. Jean Hauser took out his phone and smiled when he saw the message. It's okay. I can't retreat at a time like this. I have to let your father see my sincerity in wanting to marry you, right? Shi Mingwan was speechless when she saw the message he replied. Looking at the words, marry you on it, she replied, did you make a mistake? You should let me see your sincerity first, right? After all, you haven't even proposed. Then I'll propose now. Marry me. Can you? That's it? I don't want to agree. Then what do I have to do to agree? What do you think? Anyway, I don't want to marry you like this. You should rest for a while. When you wake up, maybe your father will let me in. Dream on. Shi Mingwan didn't doubt her father's determination at all. You're standing there looking at your wife. My father might agree to let you in. Then why don't we make a bet? Let's see if your father will let me in when you wake up from your nap. Let's bet. Shi Mingwan didn't believe him. When he replied to the message, the corners of his mouth curled up, and there was a faint smile in his eyes. If you lose, what will you do? If I lose, I'll listen to everything you say. Okay. In Shi Mingwan's opinion, Jean Hauser would definitely lose. If I win, you'll marry me. Shi Mingwan looked at Jean Hauser's message and was a little speechless. How could she lose? She wouldn't lose. Okay. I'm going to take a nap now. If you can really get my father to let you in, I'll marry you. It's a deal. It's a deal. After replying to the message, Shi Mingwan really went to sleep. At first she couldn't fall asleep. Hearing that there was no sound outside, she thought that John Hausa must still be standing outside. For some reason she felt good. Just as she was sleeping soundly, Mother Shi's voice woke her up. Get up. For a moment, Shi Mingwan didn't understand where she was. She sat up and looked at Mother Shi. Mom? Yes. When you wake up, go downstairs and talk about your marriage with John Hausa. Shi Mingwan blinked. Mom, what are you talking about? Since you're awake, go downstairs. John Hausa is downstairs. Come down first. Let's see what you plan to do about your marriage. Was there something wrong with her ears? What was Mother Shi talking about? My marriage with John Hausa? Could there be someone else? Mother Shi tapped her forehead. All right, hurry up. I'll ask your second and third uncles to come over for dinner tonight. It can be considered as letting John Hausa meet his relatives. What kind of godly operation was this? Shi Mingwan couldn't understand it now. After Mother Shi went out, she quickly got up and used the shortest time to take care of herself. She changed her clothes and hurried downstairs. When she went downstairs, she realized that the atmosphere downstairs was a little strange. Other than Father Shi, Mother Shi, and John Hausa, there was actually Grandma Shi? She was very surprised. How did John Hausa enter the door? But before that, she had to greet Grandma Shi. Grandma? Although she wasn't close to Grandma Shi, she still had to be polite. Wan, you're back? It's so hot today. Why don't you sleep a little longer? Grandma Shi seemed to be in a particularly good mood today. She saw that Shi Mingwan didn't give her the same attitude as before. This sudden enthusiasm made Shi Mingwan feel flattered for a moment. She stood there without moving. Grandma Shi had already come forward and pulled Shi Mingwan's hand. Wan, look at you. Why didn't you tell Grandma that you found a boyfriend? You should have brought him back a long time ago. Shi Mingwan's hand was held by Grandma Shi. She blinked and looked at John Hausa. My grandma let you in? Your dad let me in. Impossible. It's already a light punishment for my dad not to hit you. How could he let you in? Your dad is right there. Do you want to ask him? Just like that, their gazes met in the air. In a few moments, they had already understood the meaning in each other's eyes. Shi Mingwan bit her lip and didn't wait for her to look at Father Shi. Grandma Shi had already pulled her hand and sat down at the side. You're here at the right time. I was just talking about how to deal with the banquet. Shi Mingwan realized that she couldn't keep up with her grandmother's train of thought. Why did she suddenly jump to the banquet? Sure enough, she hadn't said anything yet. Father Shi's face darkened first. Mom, who said we're going to have a banquet? Don't add to the mess. I haven't agreed to Wan's marriage yet. What did you say? Grandma Shi's expression changed instantly. She glared at Father Shi with a dissatisfied expression. What nonsense are you talking about? You don't even agree to such a good son-in-law. Tell me, what kind of son-in-law do you want? Don't tell me you still want your daughter to marry a president? Mom? Father Shi's face turned green. It's not like that. I know. He was engaged before. So what if he was engaged? Not to mention engaged. Even if he was married, wouldn't he be allowed to remarry after a divorce? Mom? Father Shi had been Grandma Shi's son for many years. How could he not know that his mother was especially good at causing trouble? He told me about Hausa on the way just now. How big of a deal is it? Isn't it just an engagement? Since it's over, it means that they're not fated. Now that he's going to be with Wan, it means that he and Wan are fated. Don't you think so? Father Shi had a headache. Look, even Hausa was called. His face was full of anger, but the other party was his mother. There were still outsiders around, so he didn't necessarily want to quarrel with Grandma Shi in front of outsiders. On the other hand, it was rare for Mother Shi to stand on the same side as her mother-in-law after so many years. Yes, it still depends on fate. Look, even your wife said that. That means that our Wan and Hausa are fated. Hausa, don't you think so? Jean Hausa nodded in agreement. Yes, I have a deep fate with Wan. That's right. Grandma Shi looked at Jean Hausa with satisfaction. Oh right, what's Hausa's zodiac sign? I'm a dragon. Look. Grandma Shi's eyes lit up as she looked at Father Shi. Hausa is a dragon. Our Wan is a horse. The year of the dragon and the year of the horse are a perfect match. If Shi Mingwan were to drink water now, she would definitely spit it out. She looked at Grandma Shi and realized for the first time that her grandmother was also a talent. Mom, what era is this? You still believe in this? Father Shi was even more displeased with Jean Hausa now. However, he couldn't flare up. Why don't you believe it? Look at Master Zhao at the east end of the village. He's a dragon and he's married to a tiger. They fight every day. What did that fortune teller Zhang Banxian say? He said that it's best for a dragon to marry a horse. A perfect match. They're a match made in heaven. Shi Mingwan had a hard time holding back her laughter. She couldn't help but look at Zhang Haoze and found that he was listening to Grandma Shi's nonsense seriously. She couldn't help but rub her forehead. This was really, Haoze, don't you think so? Yes. Zhang Haoze wasn't impatient at all. Instead he agreed. I've asked a few friends who have studied metaphysics before. They also said that Wanwan and I are a good match. Shi Mingwan had already lowered her head and didn't want to look at Zhang Haoze. How come she didn't know that Zhang Haoze would actually talk nonsense with a straight face? I knew it. Since that's the case, let's settle things as soon as possible. Grandma Shi thought for a moment. This year is a good year. You know, right? There's no beginning of spring next year. It's best to get married this year. I think so too. If possible, I hope to marry Wanwan as soon as possible. Child, I can tell that you're a good person at first glance. Grandma Shi smiled like a flower. Shi Mingwan really couldn't stand it anymore, but the two in front of her continued. How about this? I'll let Zhang Banxian see which day is suitable. Okay, I'll listen to Grandma. Zhang Haoze nodded. Before choosing a good day we can get engaged first. Mom? Father Shi couldn't take it anymore. I haven't agreed yet. Why won't you agree? Grandma Shi stood up and looked at Father Shi. Didn't you say that when I didn't let you marry Wanwan's mother in the past? Now marriage is free and love is free. You said that times are different and you told us as parents not to interfere with our children's marriage? Why are you interfering with Wanwan's marriage now that it's in your hands? Father Shi was speechless. Wanwan, let me ask you, you brought Haoze back, right? Yes. Shi Mingwan had a hard time holding it in just now, but now it was even harder. You like him and he likes you. You two are together of your own free will, right? Yes. Shi Mingwan ignored Father Shi's ugly expression and nodded vigorously. Look, Grandma Shi spread out her hands. Isn't it settled now? Marriage is free and love is free. You said it. Mom? Father Shi felt a headache coming on. All right, it's settled then. Grandma Shi made the decision on the spot. Wanwan, accompany Haoze around town. I'll discuss with your father and see what to do about your marriage. Also, I'll make the decision tonight. I'll ask your second uncle, third uncle, and your aunt to come over for dinner. I'll also let him recognize his relatives. Got it, Grandma. Mother Shi had said this just now, so Shi Mingwan wasn't surprised at all. She pulled Zhang Haoze's hand and walked out. Her footsteps were a little fast. She was really afraid that if she stayed any longer she wouldn't be able to control herself. After so long, this was the first time she realized that her grandmother had such a powerful ability. She did have some questions to ask Zhang Haoze. Therefore she couldn't care less about Father Shi's fierce and sharp gaze and left the house with Zhang Haoze. She took a nap. Coincidentally, the sun outside wasn't that bright anymore. The clouds in the sky covered the sun. A gust of wind blew over. Not only was it not hot, but it was also cool. Shi Mingwan breathed in the familiar fresh air of her hometown and turned to look at Zhang Haoze. Tell me, how did you do it? Zhang Haoze didn't answer her question. He just pinched her palm. Don't worry about how I did it. Did I win today? Although he was very unwilling to admit it, he really won. Shi Mingwan nodded. Yes, you won. So, you're going to marry me? Tell me first, how did you do it? Enticement. Zhang Haoze threw out two words. Shi Mingwan blinked and thought of Grandma Shi's usual personality. What benefits did you promise my grandmother? Without waiting for Zhang Haoze to answer, she suddenly raised her hand. No, tell me first, how did you know to look for my grandmother? She didn't believe that Zhang Haoze didn't have a helper. The biggest possibility was, my sister, right? She must have told you to look for my grandmother. Smart, it's your sister. Zhang Haoze smiled. He was quite satisfied with this future sister-in-law. She was the one who asked me to look for grandmother. Because Grandma Shi didn't have a good relationship with Mother Shi, and because she was angry that Father Shi refused to listen to her and adopt a stepson, she had always been taking turns staying at second uncle and third uncle's house. After Zhang Haoze received Shi Mingru's guidance, he quickly went to look for Grandma Shi. Of course, Shi Mingru brought him along. When Grandma Shi heard that he was Shi Mingwan's boyfriend, she listened to Shi Mingru's introduction. She didn't even take an afternoon nap and suddenly became energetic. She chatted with Zhang Haoze for a while. After Mingru went to work, she beat around the bush and listened to Jean House's conditions. She was certain that this was a rich husband. How could she let such a good man go? It was rare for Mingwan to be so lucky to meet such a good man. Grandma was so happy. More importantly, Jean House generously agreed to many of Grandma conditions. What did you agree to, my grandma? Nothing much. Jean House looked at Mingwan's beautiful side profile and avoided the question. If I can marry you, I don't think any conditions are a big deal. Jean House. That was because he didn't understand what kind of person Grandma was. If he dared to agree to those conditions, Grandma would have a way to ask for more in the future, like a bottomless pit. Don't worry. Grandma is very reasonable. There's really nothing much. Grandma was reasonable? Mingwan blinked and couldn't believe her ears. Jean House, what conditions did you agree to, my grandma? If you don't tell me, I won't marry you. It's really not a big deal. Jean House stopped in his tracks and pressed his forehead against Mingwan's forehead. He looked at her face with a hint of gentleness in his eyes. I told you those are nothing. No matter what price he had to pay, he was lucky to be able to marry her. And after Grandma received his promises, she would naturally think of a way to convince Father He didn't want to use money to bribe anyone, but if such a move was useful, he didn't mind doing it. Moreover, although Grandma occasionally looked unreliable, this time she really wasn't the one who suggested it. Jean House took the initiative to agree. He roughly knew that Mingwan and Grandma didn't have a good relationship, and he also knew that after so many years, there were some things in Mingwan's heart that she couldn't forget. If he could get Grandma to agree to their marriage with just a little money and make their relationship better, then why wouldn't he do it? Jean House's words moved Mingwan a little. She looked at Jean House and suddenly tiptoed and kissed him on the lips. Thank you, Jean House. Her actions made Jean House smile. He was obviously very satisfied with her initiative. However, that's it? Your thank you gift is still so insincere. Mingwan's face turned red. What else do you want? Nothing, I just wanted to remind you. Remember that you lost to me and you have to marry me. Mingwan pulled her hand back and took a big step back. I won't. I didn't even propose. I won't marry you. You won't marry me? Jean House narrowed his eyes and chased after Mingwan. Mingwan quickly ran away. The two of them chased each other on the road not far from the family's house. They didn't stop until Mingwan met an acquaintance. After Mingwan took Jean House around the town and brought him home, she realized that although Father expression was still ugly, he didn't chase Jean House out anymore. He looked at Jean House with displeasure in his eyes. Chapter 707. Mingwan took a step forward. Dad. Father felt even more uncomfortable when he saw her like this. He couldn't help but raise his voice. What? Can't I talk to him for a bit? Go and help your mother cook. You come with me. It was still too early to cook. Grandma wasn't around right now. It seemed like she had gone to second uncle and third uncle's house to call for someone. Mingwan was a little worried and couldn't help but glance at Jean House. Facing his future father-in-law's fierce gaze, Jean House patted the back of Mingwan's hand comfortingly and followed behind Father Half an hour later, Jean House returned behind Father The two of them seemed to be quite friendly. Mingwan thought, this must be my imagination. Yes, it must be. Today's experience was quite novel for Jean House. This was the first time he was put in a difficult position. It was the first time he was chased out of his house and the first time he was threatened. It was the first time Kuo-Lian-shan had eaten with such a large table of people. He had a lot of social engagements in the business world, but there weren't many people who could sit in front of him. Mingwan's family consisted of 4 people. Including Grandma there were 4 from second Uncle family, and 5 from third Uncle family. Mingwan's aunt was also called back by Grandma 2 tables were filled with people. The table was outside in the courtyard. She ate the dishes cooked by Mother herself. The ingredients were all ready-made. The chickens were reared in the back and the vegetables were picked from the fields. He was drinking the soju that Father brewed himself using the rural method. It didn't look like much, but it was full of power. Although Mingwan and Grandma occasionally didn't get along because of the matter of adoption. However, the 2 uncles and aunts were not bad people. The whole family was happy and harmonious. Although there were occasional restraints, this kind of atmosphere was very fresh for Jean House. He was inevitably drunk. After getting drunk, he slept in Mingwan's room upstairs for the whole day. In the end, when he woke up the next day under Father disdainful gaze, he brought him to the field. In this season many vegetables were already ripe, such as beans, eggplants and loofah. Father Shi asked him to help pick the vegetables. Shi Mingwan wanted to help, but Father Shi wouldn't let her. He said that this was a chance for Zhang Haoze to perform. What could Zhang Haoze say? Of course he followed them. However, this vegetable was not finished. Zhang Haoze received a call from Tang Hua. Something had happened in Qingqing. After leaving the Shi family, Zhang Haoze drove a little faster. He couldn't get on the highway here, so he had to go to the county. Before Zhang Haoze drove the car out of the town, Tang Hua had already brought the motorcade to wait for them at the entrance of the town. Tang Hua brought people here, so Zhang Haoze naturally didn't need to drive himself. He got into the car with Shi Mingwan. Before getting into the car, Shi Mingwan saw Tang Hua say something to Zhang Haoze. But the voice was too soft, so she didn't hear it clearly. When he got into the car, Shi Mingwan saw the anxiety in his eyes. He was a little worried. Did something happen to the company? Is it urgent? Fortunately, I can solve it. Zhang Haoze's expression was very calm. Speaking of which, it was really not a big deal. It was just that Zhang Li ran away with a broken arm. Shi Mingwan looked at his expression and didn't ask any more. She had discovered very early on that no matter how she asked, he wouldn't say anything that Zhang Haoze didn't want her to know. The car got on the highway very smoothly and quickly. Shi Mingwan looked at his side profile and thought of something else. Alright, what did my dad say to you yesterday? Nothing. Zhang Haoze thought of Father Shi's threat to him. He said, don't think that you have money. Our family doesn't want your money and we don't care. My daughter can earn money. Let me tell you, if you don't treat Wan well, I won't let you off even if I have to risk my life. Really? Why didn't she believe it? You have a good father. As he spoke, he held her hand and placed it in his palm. Not only that, I also have a good mother. In Shi Mingwan's heart, her parents were the best in the world. Your parents are very good. Zhang Haoze's voice seemed to be emotional. He pulled Shi Mingwan into his arms and pressed his chin against the top of her head. Actually, I also have a good mother. Originally, he also had a good father. But Shi Mingwan wanted to look up at him, but he pressed the back of her head. Unfortunately, my mother didn't live long enough to see me grow up. Your mother, she had heard before that his mother was no longer around, but she didn't know why. When I was 7 years old, she had an accident. He didn't finish his sentence, but Shi Mingwan could feel Zhang Haoze's stiff body. She subconsciously wrapped her arms around him. She looked up at him. I'm sorry. It's okay. It's all in the past. Zhang Haoze's expression was calm, but only he knew that all of that wasn't in the past. His arms around Shi Mingwan were a little tight. Shi Mingwan's hands wrapped around his waist, silently comforting him. Zhang Haoze's heart was as hard as a knife. He didn't need Shi Mingwan's comfort at all, but her actions still made him feel extremely comfortable. He reached out and patted her back gently. Feeling the fragrance on her body, the trace of ruthlessness and murderous hatred in his heart was slightly suppressed. Shi Mingwan was patted by him and actually felt a little sleepy. Before she knew it, she fell asleep. She fell asleep, but Zhang Haoze couldn't fall asleep. His mind was thinking about Zhang Li. Zhang Li had lost an arm, so he couldn't run far. Moreover, the entire Zhang family was under his surveillance. In this situation, the person who could help Zhang Li get out must be someone who was very familiar with the Zhang family. He suddenly pressed a button in the car. The glass in the middle lowered. Tang Hua turned around and looked at Zhang Haoze, asking him what was the matter with his eyes. Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mingwan, who was sleeping soundly in his arms. He took out his phone and typed a line of words before handing it to Tang Hua. Let the people watching the sanatorium take a look. Is the old man still there? Tang Hua was stunned for a moment. He obviously didn't expect Zhang Haoze to ask this. However, he nodded slightly and quickly understood what Zhang Haoze meant. After Zhang Haoze asked the question he was concerned about, he didn't ask any more. When Shi Mingwan woke up, Zhang Haoze just happened to get the news he wanted to know. The old man was missing. In a place like the sanatorium, his people were guarding it layer by layer, but the old man still didn't see him? Zhang Haoze definitely wouldn't believe that there wasn't a mole in this matter. Shi Mingwan looked at the moving car and sat up to look at the time. Are we not there yet? We're here. We're going to the airport now. Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mingwan and placed her hand in his palm. Wan, come back to Qing City with me, okay? Shi Mingwan had originally planned to follow him back, but she said, isn't it too rushed? I still have a lot of things to do in my studio. You can use the internet to handle some of the work. As for the studio, I'll hire someone to take care of it for you. I've already found a place in Qing City. It'll all follow your current model and open a new song-seeking studio. How about that? Shi Mingwan didn't expect him to move so quickly. You've already done it? Yes. Zhang Haoze nodded. I found a place. It's not far from my company in Qing City. Also, the location and half of it are based on your current style. When we go to Qing City, you can go take a look yourself. You've already taken care of it. Can I still find a reason to refuse? No. Zhang Haoze looked at her with a deep gaze. Just treat it as me being selfish. I want you to accompany me. Okay. Shi Mingwan nodded. Zhang Haoze knew that she would agree, but he didn't expect her to agree so quickly. Wanwan? It's my job anyway. It doesn't matter where I go. I can work hard to start my own business in Lin City, so I believe I can do well in Qing City. Besides, there's still you. You'll help me, right? Yes. Zhang Haoze nodded. I'll help you. 4 hours later, Zhang Haoze and Shi Mingwan arrived at Cherry Blossom Manor. You rest for a while. I have something to take care of. I probably can't have dinner with you tonight. Okay. Shi Mingwan wasn't a teenage girl who would pester her boyfriend to accompany her every day. If you have something to do, go ahead. I'm a little busy these few days. If you want to go to Rong City to see Mrs. Hua, I'll get someone to send you there. Okay, I'll think about when to go. Last time, Su Qingsang was still waiting for her to explain what happened with Zhang Haoze. She hadn't told her properly yet. This time she had to explain it to Su Qingsang properly. Zhang Haoze was a little moved by how considerate she was and how she didn't quarrel with him. He lowered his head and kissed her lips until she was panting. Wait for me to come back. Zhang Haoze finished explaining. When he left Cherry Blossom Manor, he asked Tang Hua to double the number of guards here before leaving. His destination was the Zhan family's mansion. The Zhan family's mansion was at the foot of the Green Mountain near the suburbs of Qing City. Looking up from the foot of the mountain, the entire area belonged to the Zhan family. Other than the main building in the middle, there were also side buildings on both sides and side buildings at the back. Zhan Kun was old and didn't like others to disturb him. Therefore, even the descendant of the Zhan family, Zhan Lai, lived in the side building. After Zhan Kun was sent to the sanatorium, the side building locked up Zhan Lai by Xu Qiao, Zhan Li and Zhan Yang's family. Zhang Haoze was afraid that they would be afraid, so he asked people to guard them. Other than the cook and the 2 cleaning servants, no one else could come in. Usually, the people in charge of buying vegetables were arranged by Zhang Haoze. Others could go in, but Zhan Lai's family couldn't go out. So now that Zhan Li had disappeared, it was really suspicious. After entering the door, Zhan Lai sat on the sofa. Zhan Yang had a broken leg, so he naturally couldn't run away. Bai Shuqiao sat next to Zhan Yang. When she saw Zhang Haoze enter, she was like an angry cat and started cursing again. Zhang Haoze didn't even look at her and walked straight to Zhan Lai. Where is he? He was tall and had no less than 10 bodyguards behind him. More than 10 people squeezed into the living room. Even though the living room of the Zhan family wasn't small, it still looked very cramped. Bai Shuqiao stood up and pointed at Zhang Haoze's nose. Zhang Haoze, aren't you vicious? Zhan Li is your younger brother and you actually let someone break his hand. It's one thing to break his hand, but you still want to lock us up. Let me tell you, do you think you can lock us up for the rest of our lives? Let me tell you, don't even think about it. She continued to curse, and the words that followed became more and more unpleasant to hear. Zhang Haoze walked past her and directly in front of Zhan Lai. Where is he? Zhan Lai sat on the sofa and didn't dare to speak. Zhang Haoze sneered and clapped his hands. Soon someone came in. Zhang Haoze. Zhan Lai didn't understand what he was going to do until he saw Zhang Haoze's man holding a knife and pointing it at Zhan Yang's uncrippled leg. Zhang Haoze, what are you doing? Zhang Haoze, tell him to put down the knife. What exactly do you want to do? Zhang Haoze wasn't moved at all. He waved his hand, and the knife in the man's hand was about to stab into Zhan Yang's leg. Zhan Lai stood up. Zhang Haoze, are you crazy? Where is he? Zhang Haoze's hand stopped for a moment and he stared at Zhan Lai's face. Who are you talking about? Who knows what you're talking about? Zhan Kun and Zhan Li, where are they? How would I know? As soon as Zhan Lai finished speaking, Zhang Haoze's finger moved. The knife had already pierced into Zhan Yang's thigh. Zhan Yang cried out. Bai Shuqiao screamed and wanted to rush over, but she was held up by someone. I like to be polite before resorting to force. Zhang Haoze looked quite easy to talk to. How did Zhan Li leave this place? Where is Zhan Kun? If you don't tell me, I can only continue. As he spoke, the knife that was stabbed into Zhang Yang's thigh was pulled out. Blood gushed out, and Zhang Yang screamed even more miserably. Zhang Lai stood up and someone held him up from behind. He couldn't move at all. He shouted at Zhang Haoze, "Zhang Haoze, do you have a conscience? He's your younger brother. My mother only gave birth to me. I don't have a younger brother." Zhang Haoze tilted his head, and the knife stabbed in again. Zhang Yang was about to faint from the pain. Bai Shuqiao was furious. She kept cursing, but she was afraid that Zhang Haoze would use even more ruthless methods later. "Stop." Zhang Lai was furious. "I'm your father. Stop right now." Zhang Haoze raised his head. The person who was holding Zhang Lai actually bent her knees. Zhang Lai had been living a comfortable life all these years. His face turned pale when he was suddenly treated like this. Zhang Haoze, you don't say that you're my father. You don't deserve it." Zhang Haoze looked at him coldly. His gaze was cold, without a trace of warmth. His eyes were filled with deep hatred. He looked at them as if he was looking at a dead person. "If you don't tell me where Zhang Kuan is today, I can only continue to poke holes in your beloved youngest son's body. I just don't know how long he can last." As he spoke, the subordinate pulled out the knife again. This time Zhang Yang didn't even scream. He fainted from the pain. Bai Shuqiao wanted to stand up again, but she ended up like Zhang Lai. Her knees were pushed forward, and it looked like she was going to kneel down to Zhang Haoze. She hated him more and more, but her cursing became much softer. When Zhang Haoze's men were about to stab him for the third time, Zhang Lai finally couldn't take it anymore. "Enough. I'll talk. Zhang Haoze asked his men to stop. Zhang Lai looked at Zhang Haoze. I don't know." Just as Zhang Haoze was about to get someone to attack again, Zhang Lai quickly explained, "I really don't know. The last time Uncle Qi came to see us, he said he would think of a way. The next day we found out that Zhang Li had disappeared." Afraid that Zhang Haoze would make another move, Zhang Lai shrunk his neck. "I only know this much. I don't know the rest." Zhang Haoze stood still, and his subordinate's knife once again pressed against Zhang Yang's leg. "I really don't know. Everything was arranged by Uncle Qi, we just listened to him." Zhang Haoze asked his men to stop and stared at Zhang Lai for a long time. With a wave of his hand, he quickly left with a dozen bodyguards. As for the wound on Zhang Yang's leg, as long as it didn't pierce his bones, he wouldn't die. For the next 2 days, Zhang Haoze was looking for Zhang Kuan and Zhang Yang. Zhang Yang was not to be feared. But Zhang Kuan. He had controlled the Zhang family for so many years, and his methods were first-rate, sinister and ruthless. It turned out that he hadn't been given a chance. So be it. Now that there was a chance, he wouldn't let it go so easily. He just didn't know what Zhang Kuan was planning to do. No matter what he did, Zhang Haoze wasn't afraid. He had already made all the necessary preparations. Naturally, he wouldn't let Zhang Kuan have the chance to take back the power that was already in his hands. Moreover, his goal was to destroy the Zhang family. When he returned to the Cherry Blossom Manor, Shi Mingwan was already asleep. These few days he had been busy searching for Zhang Kuan's whereabouts, so he had neglected her a lot. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. Zhang Haoze's movements were very light, but he accidentally woke Shi Mingwan up. "Dear brother?" In a daze, Shi Mingwan, who had dreamed of her youth, thought that her dear brother had returned. Zhang Haoze's response was to give her another kiss. Only then did she wake up. "Why did you only come back now? Have you eaten?" "I've eaten. I've been busy recently, so I neglected you." As Zhang Haoze spoke, he kissed her on the lips again. Shi Mingwan shook her head. "It's okay. I wasn't idle either." In the Cherry Blossom Manor, there was a full set of drawing tools that Zhang Haoze had sent over. A work desk, a computer, everything was available. She would be busy these few days. Her wedding with Zhang Haoze was only a matter of time. She had her own ideas about her wedding. Not only did she have her own ideas, but she also had requirements for the wedding dress. In this way she had something to do, so she was much calmer about Zhang Haoze not coming back. "I'll accompany you after I'm done with my work." Zhang Haoze thought for a moment. "How about I take you to see the studio tomorrow? The renovations are almost done. If you have any ideas, you can bring them up." "Sure." Shi Mingwan wanted to go when she heard him say that, but Zhang Haoze had been busy, so she didn't mention it. "Well, then go to bed early. We'll go to the studio tomorrow." He didn't touch Shi Mingwan. He kissed her on the forehead and let her sleep. Zhang Kuan couldn't find him for a while, but he wasn't in a hurry. The next morning, Jean Hauze woke up and brought Shi Mingwan to the studio he had arranged for her. However, before he could go out, he received the news from Tang Hua. There was news of Jean Kuan. Jean Hauze hung up the phone and looked at Shi Mingwan with an inexplicable sense of guilt. If you have something to do, go do it. Don't worry about me. Wan. It's okay. You can ask anyone to accompany me. Chapter 708. The news that Jean Hauze received was that two people suspected to be Jean Kuan and Jean Li appeared in a villa near the sanatorium. He knew that there was a property there that belonged to Jean Li. If it was really in their place, then it would be a piece of cake to get it. After driving for about 40 minutes, they were about to arrive at Jean Li's villa. In the villa, Jean Kuan and Jean Li didn't seem surprised by Jean Hauze's arrival at all. Especially Jean Kuan. His old face, which was covered in age spots, had a strange smile on it. He looked at Jean Hauze. He was already a candle in the wind. Another stroke and the stimulation almost made him die. But he was Jean Kuan after all. He brought himself back to life. Looking at Jean Hauze, his face was full of pride. Jean Hauze, you still have the face to come? Jean Li stood up. One of his hands was broken. Although he had a prosthetic limb, it couldn't be as nimble as a real hand. This was also the reason why he hated Jean Hauze. Jean Hauze didn't even look at them. He only stared at Jean Kuan. He spent so much effort to bring you out just to bring you here? Instead of sending you back to the Jean family? What a waste of my expression. I said I was here. Jean Kuan glared at Jean Hauze with a cold gaze. I, of course, came here because I have something to do. Return to the Jean family? You wanted to. But Jean Hauze surrounded the Jean family like an iron bucket. If he hadn't thought of a way this time, he wouldn't have been able to come out. Thinking of this, Jean Kuan hated him even more. His eyes were filled with coldness as if he wanted to kill Jean Hauze. Something to do? Who's going to help you? Uncle Chi? Before Jean Kuan could say anything, Jean Li smiled when he heard his words. Uncle Chi can naturally help Grandpa. After all, he's someone who can represent Grandpa. Really? Jean Hauze smiled and walked to the sofa opposite Jean Li and sat down. Then let's guess what you want Uncle Chi to do. For example, take back the Jean family. Let others know that you plan to hand the Jean family over to this piece of trash? Who are you scolding? Jean Li couldn't take it anymore and wanted to rush up, but the bodyguard behind Jean Hauze stood forward, so Jean Li couldn't win. As soon as they came out today, Jean Kuan couldn't wait to find some of his trusted aides. After finding them, he didn't need them to protect him. He knew that Jean Hauze would not let him die so easily. Therefore, he asked everyone to follow Uncle Chi as long as he took back the Jean family. What was Jean Hauze's people worth? Jean Hauze, don't be too proud. After today your horse will have nothing. Is that so? Jean Hauze nodded. Why don't we wait here for a while? Look who has nothing. Jean Kuan's eyes widened. He looked at Jean Hauze and suddenly had a bad premonition. Soon his phone rang. On the other end of the phone was one of his trusted aides other than Uncle Chi. Old Master, Uncle Chi ran away. What? Jean Kuan's hoarse voice almost broke. She didn't believe him at all. What did you say? Uncle Chi has been captured. Jean Kuan could no longer hear what was said on the other side of the phone. He widened his eyes and looked at Jean Hauze. What did you do? It was impossible for Uncle Chi to betray him. He was suddenly captured. Jean Hauze must have done something. Jean Hauze smiled, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. His expression was cold. You should ask, what did Uncle Chi do? What did he mean? Jean Kuan's eyes widened. You, Jean Hauze, what did you do to Uncle Chi? Jean Li's arrogant voice didn't enter Jean Hauze's ears. He looked at Jean Kuan. Or did you ask Uncle Chi to do something? Jean Kuan's methods were vicious and ruthless. After so many years, he had gotten rid of all those people who had gotten in his way. The most important person among them was naturally Uncle Chi. After decades, how many people's blood had Uncle Chi's hands been stained with? Even Jean Kuan didn't know. Don't worry. Soon it will be your turn. You. Just like every time in the past, Jean Kuan was extremely angry at Jean Hauze. However, he quickly came back to his senses. Do you think you've won? He forced himself to focus and glared at Jean Hauze. Why don't you call and ask where your woman is now? Jean Hauze narrowed his eyes. His phone rang at this moment. It was the bodyguard he had sent to follow Shi Mingwan to protect her. He didn't know what was said on the other end of the phone, but Jean Hauze's brows furrowed tightly. He raised his head and looked at Jean Kuan. What did you do? Jean Kuan seemed to know what the call was about. He was also looking at him with a gloomy smile on his face. "Your woman is in my hands," Jean Cohen sneered and said. His hoarse voice was very unpleasant to the ears. The content that was revealed was even more unpleasant to the ears. Tang Hua, who was following beside Jean Hausa, looked at Jean Hausa worriedly. Jean Hausa hung up the phone and stared straight at Jean Cohen. "What did you say?" "I said, your woman is in my hands now." Jean Cohen felt that he had finally been able to relax. "If you don't want anything to happen to your woman, then get someone to release Uncle Chi and hand over the Jean family." Jean Hausa sat there and looked at the proud and arrogant grandfather and grandson in front of him. He suddenly smiled. "What makes you think that I will hand over the entire Jean family for a woman? You won't. It's just a woman. Compared to the entire Jean family, she's really insignificant. Moreover, the Jean family is in my hands. How many women can I want?" Jean Cohen shook his head. He looked at Jean Hausa as if he was looking at him, but at the same time, it didn't seem like he was looking at him. "No, you will." "I didn't know that you know me so well." Jean Hausa's face darkened. "You're sure about something that even I'm not sure about?" "Of course I'm sure, because you're just like your father. Stupid and ridiculous. You'll abandon everything for a woman." At the thought of Jean Lai, Jean Cohen's expression turned ugly. "Is that so?" Jean Hausa's eyes darkened. "But I'm not my father. I refuse." "You?" Jean Cohen didn't believe his ears. "I don't believe it, I don't believe it at all. You did it on purpose, you did it on purpose. Do you think I'll let that woman go just because you said that? You've forgotten one thing. I'm not my father." He stood up and looked at Jean Cohen. "Don't worry, Uncle Chi isn't the only one with a criminal record. The police are already on their way. I originally thought that at your age I would have a greater sense of accomplishment if I let you stay in the sanatorium and watch me destroy the Jean family bit by bit. But now you'd better go to prison and watch me destroy the Jean family." "Jean Hausa." Jean Li stood up. Don't be too smug. Let me tell you, if you don't hand over the Jean family, your woman is dead." Jean Cohen couldn't hold on any longer. He looked at Jean Hausa. I don't believe it, I don't believe it." A police siren sounded outside the door. Jean Hausa turned around and walked out. Jean Cohen kept shaking his head behind him. "I don't believe it. I don't believe that you really don't care. Do you really not care about that woman's life or death? Impossible. Jean Hausa should be as stupid as his father. He should be as stupid as his father. He should abandon the Jean family for a woman. He should be the same as his father. He should." Jean Cohen's body softened. He began to feel uncomfortable again. But what was even more uncomfortable was to come. When Jean Hausa walked to the door, he stopped for a moment. He turned around and looked at Jean Cohen, whose face was ashen and who was about to faint. "All right, I forgot to say one thing. You can call your people and ask who the woman he kidnapped is." Jean Cohen's eyes widened. At the same time, the phone in Jean Li's hand rang. The voice on the other end of the phone was full of panic. "Old master, we kidnapped the wrong person. The person we kidnapped isn't that woman." Jean Cohen could no longer hear what was said after that. His eyes rolled back and he fainted. Jean Li wanted to do something else, but the police outside the door had already come in. He began to retreat. "I didn't commit a crime. Why are you arresting me? I didn't commit a crime. You can't arrest me. I want to find a lawyer." Jean Hausa couldn't hear what he said after that, and he didn't want to hear it. After getting into the car, the convoy quickly headed towards the city center. Shi Mingwan looked at the office environment in front of her, which was more than twice the size of her studio in Lin City, but the decoration style was the same. Other than satisfaction and surprise, there was nothing else in her eyes. She didn't know how long it would take to renovate this place, but it definitely couldn't be done in a day or two. This time, Jean Hausa had only gone to look for her during this period of time, which meant that he had been preparing for a long time. She suddenly believed what he had said about Chen Feifei. He had really started to think about breaking off the engagement a long time ago and then being with her. Otherwise he wouldn't be so attentive. Especially when she saw a few of her designs in the exhibition hall. Other than the ones she had participated in the French competition last time, there were also a few that she had participated in the domestic competition. Other than the award-winning works, there were even some of her early and slightly immature designs. All of them could be seen here. She suddenly wanted to see Jean Hausa very, very much. She wanted to ask the bodyguard where Jean Hausa was. If possible, she wanted to go directly to Jean Hausa's place. She wanted to go find him. She really liked this gift too much, too much. When she turned around, she realized that Jean Hausa had arrived at some point in time. She quickly went forward. Without thinking, she threw herself into his arms. "You're here?" When Zhang Haoze saw her, he knew that under his arrangements, nothing would happen to Shi Mengwan, but he still couldn't help but reach out and hug her tightly. His heart, which had been hanging in the air all along the way, finally relaxed a little. She was still here. She was safe and sound. Zhang Kun didn't affect her. His people didn't succeed either. She was still fine. This was good, very good. Haoze? He hugged her too tightly, making it hard for her to breathe. She couldn't help but look up at him. Zhang Haoze finally let go of her. He looked at his surroundings and looked at her again. "And how is it? Do you like it?" Shi Mengwan nodded heavily and hugged his waist. "I like it, I really like it." It was exactly what she had imagined the studio to look like. It was bigger, better, and the style was more suitable. If there's anything else you don't think is suitable, you can tell Tang Hua directly and ask him to get someone to change it. There's nothing inappropriate. Everything is suitable. When he said that it was being renovated, she really thought that it was a studio that was still being renovated. But who knew that he would give her such a big surprise? How was this still being renovated? She could just come in and work. It's good that it's suitable. Zhang Haoze hugged her waist and gently stroked her hair with his hand. There was a faint smile on his face. "I asked Tang Hua to recruit people. The preliminary exam has already been passed. If you're at ease, let Tang Hua do the second exam and interview. If you're not at ease, you can do it yourself. The information is ready. It's in your office in front." He had thought of something for her that she hadn't thought of. As for the studio in Lin City, there's no need to end it. You can arrange for people you trust. Continue to operate as a branch. There are also the 2 contract factories that you contacted. If you can't handle the work in Lin City, I asked Tang Hua to buy 2 clothing factories in Qing City. From now on they're all yours. Zhang Haoze's words made Shi Mengwan's eyes widen. 2 clothing factories. What did that mean? If he said he would buy them, he would buy them. "Zhang Haoze, you'll spoil me rotten if you do this." She only thought that a factory would be willing to split out a production line to make the clothes she designed, but she never thought that she would be able to have a clothing factory herself. "You're spoiling me rotten just like that?" Zhang Haoze felt that she was too easily satisfied. "Since you want to be big, of course you'll be more at ease with your own factory. At least you can control more." "Okay." He was so thoughtful. What else was Shi Mengwan not satisfied with? She tiptoed and kissed him on the lips. "Thank you, Haoze." Zhang Haoze looked at her and held her hand in his. "I don't want your thanks. What's mine is yours. You never have to say thanks to me." Because of his words, Shi Mengwan reached out to hold his face. She looked at him fixedly and met his eyes. "Zhang Haoze, are you really Zhang Haoze?" Was the man who was so good at saying sweet words, thinking for her, and thinking of all her problems really her dear brother? Was he really the Zhang Haoze who used to be as cold as ice to her? "If I'm not Zhang Haoze, who am I?" Shi Mengwan suddenly smiled. Yes, if he wasn't her dear brother, who else could he be? "Or do you not like me like this?" "I like it." Shi Mengwan hugged him tightly. "I like it too much." "It's good that you like it." As he spoke, he snapped his fingers. Soon, someone brought in a large bouquet of roses. He knelt down on one knee in front of her. He handed the roses in his hand to her. "Wanwan, marry me." Shi Mengwan bit her lip. She didn't believe that there would be so many surprises today. "Zhang Haoze, you marry me? I know it's very difficult for you to let go of everything in Lin City and come here with me, but I still selfishly hope that you will agree to marry me. I promise that I will always treat you well and take care of you for the rest of your life." Shi Mengwan covered her lips and looked at the large bouquet of roses. Her eyes turned red and tears welled up in the corners of her eyes. "I promise you." Zhang Haoze watched as she took the bouquet of roses and took out a ring from it. It wasn't the big diamond ring she had imagined. Instead, it was a very ordinary diamond ring that looked a little old. The diamond was small and not big, but the luster was moving. The style was also very classic. Zhang Haoze put the ring on Shi Mengwan's hand. His slender fingers gently pointed at the surface of the ring. "This is considered an engagement ring. I've already asked someone to make the wedding ring. It will take some time before it can be sent back." "It's okay." Shi Mengwan didn't mind. Zhang Haoze didn't look at her. He just stared at the ring. "This ring is my mother's relic. It's the wedding ring she used to marry my father." Shi Mengwan looked at this extraordinary ring. At this moment she could almost feel the weight of this ring. "Actually, there's no need to specially order a wedding ring. This one is also very good." "No. You deserve better." Zhang Haoze held her hand as if he had thought of something. Let's go. I'll take you somewhere? Where to? You'll know when you come with me, Zhan Haoze said. Shi Mingwan looked at him and followed him with the large bouquet of roses in her arms. They went out together. Zhan Haoze sat in the car with a serious expression. He picked up the phone a few times, but Shi Mingwan almost didn't hear him speak. It was just a simple, "And okay, I got it." Such a response, such a Zhan Haoze, made her feel as if he had returned to when they first met. She couldn't help but reach out to hold Zhan Haoze's hand. Zhan Haoze turned around to look at her. When he met the worry in her eyes, he patted her hand. Zhan Haoze? Are you okay? I'm fine. Zhan Haoze held her hand tightly, and the expression on his face was a little complicated. He seemed to be relaxed, yet nervous, yet in pain, yet happy. Shi Mingwan couldn't tell, but Zhan Haoze's gaze made her heart ache. She couldn't help but hold his hand and snuggle into his arms at the same time. I'll be with you. I'll always be with you. Zhan Haoze didn't say anything more. He just pressed his chin against the top of her head and smelled the faint fragrance on her body. The urge to kill slowly relaxed. Zhan Kun wasn't locked up in the end. Because he fainted again. This time he probably wouldn't be able to save him. Uncle Chi refused to confess what he had done, even if the evidence was irrefutable. But regardless of whether he confessed or not, he would probably end up in prison. As for Zhan Li and Zhan Yang, without Zhan Kun they were nothing to be afraid of. The remaining Bai Shuqiao and Zhan Lai, the Bai family wanted to help Bai Shuqiao seize power with the business travel package and regain control of the Zhan family. But the Bai family had been arrogant enough for the past few years. In the past few days he had been speeding up his actions to deal with the Bai family. He believed that in less than a week the Bai family would go bankrupt. If the Bai family went bankrupt, Bai Shuqiao would no longer have any bargaining chips or loyalty. Zhan Lai would lose such help, and Zhan Li and Zhan Yang wouldn't be able to live up to expectations. The Zhan family could be considered to be completely finished. And his cautiousness and forbearance over the past few months had also come to an end. The police were already on their way to the Zhan family's mansion. It wouldn't take long for the Zhan family to be sealed up. After all, Zhan Kun, Uncle Chi and Zhan Lai's hands weren't clean. Without the Zhan family might be even worse than ordinary people. His long-cherished wish had finally come true. Chapter 709. Shi Mingwan, who was sitting in the car, only saw that it was a mountain. The mountain wasn't very high, and the car drove straight up the mountain. They were now halfway up the mountain. Following Zhan Haoze out of the car, he held her hand and walked to a small path on the side. Shi Mingwan had a faint premonition in her heart. She knew why he brought her here and what he wanted to do. Sure enough, after going around a small hill, she saw a very grand and magnificent graveyard. Someone behind Zhan Haoze handed him 3 bouquets of chrysanthemums. Wanwan, this is my mom. Shi Mingwan looked at the cemetery. Discovered that the cemetery is not just for one person. On both sides were 2 larger tombstones, and on the right was a woman. The woman in the black and white photo was smiling brightly, and her eyebrows and eyes were somewhat similar to Zhan Haoze's. On it was written, Mother Qiao Ruoliu's grave. Zhan Haoze stood there sobbing. Was this Zhan Haoze's mother? She looked at Zhan Haoze and then at the other 2 graves. The larger one on the right read, Father Zhanlie's grave. It was also erected by Zhan Haoze. Zhan Lai on the tombstone looked 70% similar to Zhan Haoze. He was the combination of Zhan Lai and Qiao Ruoliu. The word Qiao made Shi Mingwan take another look at Zhan Haoze. Qiaoze? However, what attracted Shi Mingwan's attention the most was the smaller tombstone in the middle. Sister Zhan Jiao's tomb. These simple words made Shi Mingwan's eyes widen. She looked at Zhan Haoze in disbelief. According to the time on these 3 tombstones, Zhan Haoze lost all his family in one day. Parents, sister. Zhan Haoze placed the flowers in front of the 3 tombstones, then squatted down in front of the tombstones. He reached out and stroked the tombstone in the middle. His gaze was sorrowful and distant. Actually, I don't know if she's a younger sister or a younger brother. I only hope that she's a younger sister. Zhan Kun valued men over women. He also had a lot of illegitimate children, but most of them didn't get his approval. It was impossible for him to have a good relationship with those girls from the Zhan family. He had hoped to have a younger sister, and he had also thought that he would have one. If not for that shot. No, it wasn't just one shot, it was many shots. Shi Mingwan didn't quite understand the first sentence, but she reacted to the second sentence. She widened her eyes and looked at Zhan Haoze. Her lips moved, but she couldn't say a word. Zhan Haoze pressed his forehead against the tombstone. Actually, he knew that there was nothing there. Whether it was his sister's grave or his parents', they were all empty. Seriously speaking, these could only be regarded as cenotaphs. Because whether it was Qiao Ruoliu or Zhan Lai, their corpses were not here. Shi Mingwan looked at the 3 tombstones and her lips moved. She remembered that Zhan Haoze said that his mother was dead, but he didn't say that his father was also gone. Dad, Mom, I'm here to see you. Zhan Haoze took out a handkerchief and gently wiped the tombstone. Dad, Mom, I brought Wanwan to see you. Wanwan is the girl I mentioned to you before I came up here. I've asked her to marry me. Zhan Haoze seemed to have thought of something. He pressed his forehead against the tombstone, and his gaze was deep. He used to have a happy family. His mother was an extremely ordinary primary school teacher. But she was very gentle. She liked children and liked to laugh. She came from an ordinary background, but she accidentally met Zhan Lai, the young master of the Zhan family, who was all-powerful in Qing City. At first she didn't know Zhan Lai's identity. Zhan Lai liked Qiao Ruoliu like a demon. After knowing that his father wouldn't agree, he naturally eloped with Qiao Ruoliu. Qiao Ruoliu's mother was from Lin City, so the 2 of them settled down in Lin City. Qiao Ruoliu taught, while Zhan Lai found a job as an ordinary employee. The 2 of them didn't have much money, but they were very happy. Especially after they had Zhan Haoze, this happiness became 3 parts. As an elementary school teacher, Qiao Ruoliu liked children very much, especially her son. She would hold him in her arms and read to him. When he slowly grew up, she taught him to play the piano and sing. As for Zhan Lai, after getting rid of the controlling Zhan Kun, he became an ordinary father. He would bring Zhan Haoze to the park and carry his son on his shoulders. He would bring Zhan Haoze to play basketball and football together. That period of childhood was the happiest time of Zhan Haoze's life. He had a very happy family. This kind of happiness lasted until he was 9 years old. When he was 9 years old, Qiao Ruoliu became pregnant again. This was a very happy news for the Zhan family. At that time she was only 2 months pregnant and didn't look pregnant. However, Zhan Lai and Zhan Haoze already knew. They were looking forward to it and were very happy. The arrival of a new life. When Qiao Ruoliu asked the father and son if they liked a son or a daughter, the 2 of them said that they liked a girl. I'm going to be an elder brother. Zhan Haoze was very happy at that time. This kind of happiness made him and Zhan Lai plan every day how to dote on her if they had a younger sister. He had a lot of plans how to take care of this younger sister, how to be a good elder brother. Zhan Haoze would never forget what happened on the day of the accident. Because that day was Qiao Ruoliu's birthday. Zhan Haoze wanted to give Qiao Ruoliu a birthday present. That day happened to be Saturday. Zhan Haoze had prepared the present the day before and wanted to hide it to surprise Qiao Ruoliu. No matter how he thought about it, he didn't know where to hide it. In the end, he chose to hide it in a cabinet in the living room. The cabinet was very big. Qiao Ruoliu had just cleaned it out the day before and said that she wanted to put something in it. At that time, Zhan Haoze was still small, so he could hide inside. He hid it well and planned to give Qiao Ruoliu a surprise when his mother and father entered the house. However, he didn't expect that Qiao Ruoliu and Zhan Lai didn't come back, but Zhan Kun came first. Zhan Kun brought Uncle Qi and many people in black clothes into his house. He saw it through the gap of the cabinet door. He, who had never seen such a scene, was so scared that he didn't dare to make a sound. Zhan Kun asked his men to search around the house, but he didn't know what to search for. It was only when a man in black walked over to open the cabinet that he was scared out of his wits. At this moment, Zhan Lai and Qiao Ruoliu returned. Qiao Ruoliu was pregnant. Zhan Lai was worried that she would go shopping alone, so he accompanied her. Today was her birthday and they even bought a cake on the way back. When they saw Zhan Kun enter the door, both of them were shocked. The things in their hands almost fell to the ground. Zhan Lai was more mature in the end. He asked Qiao Ruoliu to bring the things into the kitchen, while he confronted Zhan Kun. Zhan Kun wanted him to go back to the Zhan family with him, but Zhan Lai refused. Zhan Kun used Qiao Ruoliu to threaten him. Zhan Lai knew that his father had always been a man of his word, but he never thought that he would have the intention to kill Qiao Ruoliu. In the past, he spent every day training and managing the Zhan family's business. Everything he did was carried out according to Zhan Kun's will. After a long time, he almost forgot what he was like. Zhan Lai didn't want to live like that. He begged Zhan Kun to let him go. He didn't want to go back to the Zhan family. If he had to go back to the Zhan family, he had to bring Qiao Ruoliu back as well. Zhan Kun was angered by his son, but he didn't show any expression on his face. He opened his mouth again and asked Zhan Lai if he wanted to go back with him. When he got a negative answer, he vented all his anger on Xiao Ruoliu. It was this woman. It was her. It was her who seduced his son. It was her who caused his son to become like this. Zhang Kun didn't expect that the son he had spent so much effort to nurture would one day get out of his control, so he fired a shot at Xiao Ruoliu without thinking. When Zhang Haoze saw this scene, his heart was torn apart. But before he could react, Zhang Lai had already rushed forward and blocked in front of Xiao Ruoliu. That shot was aimed at the heart. Zhang Lai died in the hands of his own father just like that. Zhang Kun didn't expect that his shot would kill his son. His anger turned into shock. But after the shock, it condensed into even greater anger. It was all that B'Tch's fault. It was her. She was the one who caused his son to risk his life for her. Zhang Kun was so angry that he went crazy. When he saw Xiao Ruoliu, who had pounced on Zhang Lai and was crying loudly, he felt extremely angry. He held the gun and fired 2 shots, sending Xiao Ruoliu on her way. Xiao Ruoliu fell on Zhang Lai's body and died just like that. Zhang Haoze was completely dumbfounded. He had even forgotten what he wanted to do and what he could do. He watched as Zhang Kun looked at the 2 corpses in front of him and coldly asked his subordinates to dispose of them. At this moment, Zhang Haoze finally reacted. He rushed out of the cupboard and threw himself on his parents. He kept calling their names. But there was no reaction at all. In the end, Zhang Haoze rushed up and randomly hit Zhang Kun. But his body was quickly held up by someone. Zhang Kun wanted to eliminate the roots and kill Zhang Haoze as well. But before he could kill Zhang Haoze, Uncle Chi's phone rang first. In the early years, for the sake of power, Zhang Kun married the daughter of the Lu family in the province where Zhang Lai's Qingqing was located. After his wife died, the Lu family took good care of Zhang Lai, their grandson. Previously, he hadn't come looking for him because Zhang Lai was under the protection of the outer sect. Recently, the Lu family had fallen into some small trouble. Zhang Kun could finally teach Zhang Lai a lesson. Who knew that this lesson would cause him to lose his sense of propriety? Zhang Lai was dead. Uncle Chi received the news at this moment. Zhang Lai's grandfather had actually been re-elected. Although Zhang Kun's power was great, it was impossible for him to disregard the power of the government. Just now he had killed Zhang Lai and Xiao Ruoliu on impulse. But now that he had calmed down, he knew that he was in trouble. Zhang Lai's grandfather pitied his grandson for losing his mother early, so he valued this grandson very much. Now Zhang Lai was dead and he died at his hands. It was time for him to expand his power. If Zhang Lai's grandfather went all out to deal with him, it would be quite troublesome. Zhang Kun wasn't afraid of trouble, but he didn't want to stop expanding his business territory. After thinking about it, he decided not to kill Zhang Haoze for the time being. At least, Zhang Haoze couldn't die now. He had someone knock Zhang Haoze out and bring him back to Qing City. And then, in order to cover up his actions, he ordered Uncle Chi to deal with Zhang Lai and Xiao Ruoliu's bodies. When he got on the plane, Zhang Kun, who was already crazy, looked at the unconscious Zhang Haoze and thought of a very crazy plan. He couldn't let anyone know that he had killed Zhang Lai. Then the best way was to let Zhang Lai still be alive. On this point, Zhang Kun couldn't help but rejoice. Although his illegitimate children couldn't be seen in public, they were of some use at this time. Because one of his illegitimate children looked 70% similar to him. Zhang Lai's appearance was very similar to his. That illegitimate child only looked 60% similar to Zhang Lai. Zhang Kun asked someone to bring the illegitimate child back to the old house. Then he hired a first-class plastic surgeon to do a microsurgery on the illegitimate child. In the end, a fake Zhang Lai was born just like that. Zhang Lai's grandfather was already old. He hadn't seen his grandson for a few years, so he naturally missed him. That illegitimate child was already married and had given birth to Zhang Li and Zhang Yang. Zhang Kun knew all of this. But in the past he didn't care, nor did he value it. Now he began to pretend to value it. He let the fake Zhang Lai learn some of Zhang Lai's previous behaviors and habits until the two of them were very close. That was why he let him appear in front of Zhang Lai's grandfather. Why did he leave Zhang Haoze alive? It was his last trump card. If the fake Zhang Lai couldn't be fooled, then no matter what, Zhang Haoze was still the great-grandson of the Lu family. At crucial times, it was always a protective talisman. If the fake Zhang Lai could be fooled, then Zhang Haoze would be useless. In fact, according to Zhang Kun's plan, it didn't matter whether Zhang Haoze stayed or not. It was Uncle Chi's idea to keep Zhang Haoze. He was also one of the people who nurtured Zhang Lai. He had watched Zhang Lai grow up. At that moment he felt a trace of compassion. He spared Zhang Haoze's life. But Zhang Haoze knew that his parents had died in Zhang Kuan's hands, so how could he let it go so easily? In order to convince Zhang Kuan, Uncle Qi made a suggestion. He could hypnotize Zhang Haoze and make him forget what had happened in the past. It had to be said that this idea was not bad. Zhang Kuan had killed the son he had raised on impulse. Although he didn't regret it, he was still willing to give Zhang Haoze a chance. The 9-year-old Zhang Haoze was hypnotized. He had forgotten that it was a scene he would pursue for the rest of his life. Not only did he forget, but after he was hypnotized he actually thought that the fake Zhan Lai was his father. In order to coax the Liu family, Zhan Li and Zhan Yang were not brought back to the Zhan family's mansion. Zhang Kuan decided to nurture a new successor that he liked. That was Zhang Haoze. Didn't you, Zhan Lai, not want to go back to the Zhan family? Didn't you not want to take over the Zhan family? I want your son to take over. I want your son to stay in the Zhan family forever. Zhang Haoze, who was hypnotized, always felt that something was wrong. But he was too young and the power of hypnosis was too strong. He couldn't remember. But he instinctively didn't like Zhang Kuan very much. Every time he faced him he would be very resistant. Including the fake Zhan Lai. He would call him father, but he no longer had the same intimacy as before. He wasn't close to Zhan Lai, but he was dismissive towards Zhang Kuan. Every time he saw him, his face would be cold. It was fine once or twice, but after a long time, Zhang Kuan didn't want to see him anymore. After acting in front of the Liu family and successfully deceiving them. He had also lost his patience with Zhang Haoze, who didn't like him every time he saw him. Although he didn't kill him, he had someone send Zhang Haoze to boarding school. Zhang Haoze stayed in boarding school until junior high school. When he was 14, Zhan Li and Zhan Yang also entered this junior high school. By chance, Zhang Haoze accidentally met the fake Zhan Lai, who had sent Zhan Li and Zhan Yang to school. He wanted to go up and call him father. That was his father. Even though he no longer felt close to him, he was still his father. But when he called him father, he was mocked by Zhan Li and Zhan Yang. This is my father, not your father. He went to see Zhan Lai. At that time, Zhan Lai couldn't speak in the Zhan family. After reprimanding Zhan Li and Zhan Yang, he told Zhang Haoze that he was his father and told him not to listen to Zhan Li and the others' nonsense. If you're my father, then are they also your children? Are they children you had with another woman? In Zhang Haoze's memory, his mother died in an accident, so his father, Zhan Lai, brought him back to the Zhan family. But now he was told that Zhan Lai had other children? Haoze, they are also my children. They are your younger brothers. The fake Zhan Lai in the past wouldn't have been willing to pretend to be Zhan Lai. But after he tasted the benefits of pretending to be Zhan Lai, he wasn't willing to give up. No, I don't have a younger brother. I don't have a brother. Zhang Haoze refused to accept and ran away. He remembered that he didn't have a brother. He remembered that his parents were very loving. But why was everything different after her mother died? Zhang Haoze returned to the dormitory with a splitting headache. However, under the suppression of the hypnosis, he still couldn't remember. He only felt a headache. But that day, someone in Zhang Haoze's dormitory happened to be celebrating his birthday. The man brought back a birthday cake. Seeing that Zhang Haoze was uncomfortable, she even said that she would treat him to a cake. A cake? Birthday? Those keywords made Zhang Haoze's headache worse. He finally fainted from the pain. Zhang Haoze's roommate hurriedly called the dormitory management and sent him to the hospital. In the hospital, Zhang Haoze remembered everything. He remembered that his mother had died in Zhang Kuan's hands, and he also remembered that his father had also died in Zhang Kuan's hands. His parents were dead, but he did not avenge them. He even called Zhang Kuan grandpa? And he followed Zhang Kuan back to the Zhan family? Zhang Haoze could not forgive himself. He could not stay in the Zhan family anymore. Not only could he no longer stay in the Zhan family, but he could no longer stay in Qing City. He was only 14 years old. He wanted revenge. He wanted to kill Zhang Kuan to avenge his parents. But he didn't know how a 14-year-old like him could do it. Zhang Kuan was a very cautious person. Even when he was sleeping, there were bodyguards outside his door. Not to mention that every time he went out, he was always accompanied by more than a dozen bodyguards. Zhang Haoze wanted such a big battle. He left the hospital and went back to school. He thought for a long time, but in the end he decided to leave first. Just like that, Zhang Haoze left the Zhan family in Qing City. At first he didn't know where to go. Later he decided to return to the city where his mother used to live. Lin City. When Zhang Haoze found his home, he found that the area had been demolished and replanned. The home that he and his parents used to live in could no longer be found. Not only could he not find it, but there wasn't even a trace of it. But even so, Jean Hausa had never thought of leaving Lin City. This was the place where his parents had lived with him for 9 years. The more painful the later years were, the more blissful those 9 years were. Shi Mingwan was stunned when she heard this. That Zhang Kun, was he crazy? He killed his own son and daughter-in-law, and he didn't even let his own grandson off? Such a person wasn't crazy, but he was probably already crazy, right? After all, if he wasn't crazy, how could he do such a thing? Hausa? Shi Mingwan didn't know what she could do at this time. She couldn't even imagine what she, who had always had a happy family, would do if she encountered such a thing. She squatted down and hugged Zhang Hausa's shoulder. It had been a long time since the incident happened. Any consolation would be useless at this moment. She could only hug him tightly, hugging him with all her might. Zhang Hausa looked at the 3 tombstones expressionlessly. His life was divided into 2 stages. Before he was 9 years old, after he was 9 years old. No, it should be said that before he was 9 years old and after he was 14 years old. The few years in the Zhang family in between could only be considered a nightmare for him. After he was 14 years old. Every day, every hour, every minute of his life he lived only for revenge. Shi Mingwan looked at the side of his face and thought about everything he had experienced. At this moment, all the confusion and reproach she once had towards Zhang Hausa disappeared. There was only a faint heartache left. For such a man to watch his own parents die in front of him, how strong must his mentality be to keep him from collapsing? She suddenly understood why Zhang Hausa always had a cold face and why it was so difficult for him to smile. No one would be able to smile when they encountered such a thing, right? Then what happened after that? Zhang Kun, how was he now? Shi Mingwan looked at him with concern. Su Qingsang had heard about the Zhang family from Hua Jinyao. Su Qingsang had mentioned it to Shi Mingwan before. Shi Mingwan knew that Zhang Hausa's father was still alive. But Zhang Lai seemed to have a wife. At first, she thought that Zhang Lai had married someone else, which was why Zhang Hausa's relationship with his father was so bad. But she didn't expect that Zhang Lai wasn't Zhang Hausa's father at all. Zhang Hausa didn't say anything. He stood up. He looked at the tombstone. Dad. Mom. I've avenged you. There was only one sentence, a simple sentence. But Shi Mingwan could understand what he meant. Your grandfather, that person, how is he? That kind of person wasn't worthy of being a grandfather. Although Grandma Shi was a little unruly, she was only a little feudal. But what was Zhang Kun? In the hospital. When he came, Tang Hua had asked about it. Zhang Kun was sent in for resuscitation again. He had been struck by a stroke twice and had suffered such a huge shock. He probably wouldn't live for a few days. Zhang Hausa's voice was a little cold. He held Shi Mingwan's hand tightly. I once thought about killing him myself. Shi Mingwan wasn't surprised. Anyone who encountered such a thing would have such thoughts, right? Chapter 7:10. The mountain breeze was slightly cold. Shi Mingwan looked at him. She had some guesses in her heart, but she wasn't sure. Zhang Hausa turned to look at her and said softly, because I met you. Shi Mingwan was stunned for a moment. When she met the gentleness in his eyes, her heart trembled. Dear brother? Yes. Zhang Hausa smiled. That smile was very light. It overlapped with Qiao Zhe when he was young. At that time he only wanted revenge. When he came to Lin City, he had nothing on him and couldn't do anything to Zhang Kun. Although he wanted revenge, he couldn't find a way. What was even worse was that after Zhang Kun found out that he had run away, he sent people to hunt him down several times. If it weren't for his good luck and the fact that Zhang Kun was focused on expanding his business during that period of time, he wouldn't have been able to focus on dealing with him. Otherwise it was unknown whether he would have survived. There were naturally other reasons for this. Zhang Lai had come to Lin City and stayed for many years, so he naturally didn't stay for nothing. Although he looked like an ordinary employee, he came from the Zhang family after all. He had left someone in Lin City. Those people eventually became Zhang Hausa's help. After coming to Lin City, Zhang Hausa changed his name. He followed his biological mother's surname, Qiao Zhe. He lived in seclusion in a bungalow and rarely interacted with others. Not only to be inconspicuous, but most importantly, he didn't want Zhang Kun to say that he borrowed the Zhang family's power in the end. Even if it was someone left behind by Zhang Lai, it was still a member of the Zhang family. His surname was Qiao, so it had nothing to do with the Zhang family. He was only 14 years old and could do too little. However, this didn't stop the flames of revenge in his heart from burning. He stayed in a bungalow. This area was complicated and chaotic. Although he was only 14 years old, he had already seen the darkness of the Zhang family. In terms of methods, these hooligans wouldn't be more powerful than Zhang Kuan. In terms of ruthlessness, Zhang Haoze, who wanted revenge wholeheartedly, was like Satan from hell. No one could stop him. After he used force to subdue a few hooligans, he began to expand his territory step by step. The time he met Shi Mengwan was a mistake. He was too impatient and accidentally offended a small local leader called Brother Liang. Behind Brother Liang was a slightly famous and powerful leader in Lin City called Big Boss Hui. Brother Liang had lost face at his place. He had spent the entire night picking more than 10 people to get back at him. That day he was careless and let his subordinates go back first. At that time he had already been in Lin City for a year. During this year he relied on his fierce fighting skills to improve a lot. The young man felt that his skills were not bad, so he did not take this group of people seriously. However, in the end, it was impossible for him to not lose when fighting against more than 10 people alone. Just when he thought he was going to die, Shi Mengwan appeared. She was actually very timid and didn't dare to do anything else. She only shouted that the police were here and saved him. However, this person was quite smart and knew to make some noise. Brother Liang's men had left. His entire body was in extreme pain from being beaten up, but he knew that someone had saved him. He walked around the alley and walked in front of Shi Mengwan. Only then did he realize that the little girl was so scared that she fell to the ground. She was clearly so scared that her face was pale, but she forced herself to calm down and did not run away. For some strange reason he took the bread from her bag and ate it. He was pretending to be hungry, but he really wanted to use this opportunity to teach her a lesson. Who would have thought that a timid little girl would dare to lecture him and say that he littered? How ridiculous. Who would care about where the trash was thrown in that area? What was even more unexpected was that not only did the girl dare to lecture him, but she also dared to follow him home. The days that followed were a little out of his imagination. Not only was she bold, but she was also stupid. She gave him all the money she had. He thought that he was going to take her in, but he didn't expect her to run away the next day. She was really stupid. If it weren't for him, she would have been taken away by someone else. If 1 or 2 people went missing in this area, there would be no sound at all. After that, it was much simpler. She treated him as her savior and called him dear brother. He didn't care. It was just one more person to eat. As long as she didn't mind, he didn't care. However, after having her, his life was indeed much better. At least he didn't have to eat irregular meals and he didn't have to stop for meals. After that, things got out of his control. That year, during the Lantern Festival, that bowl of alcoholic rice balls. He looked at her blushing face under the light and suddenly couldn't control the impulse in his heart. The young kiss, the intimacy of hugging each other to sleep every day. At that time he was already 15 years old and had been on the streets for so long. He knew almost everything he needed to know. He knew in his heart that he had high hopes for the girl. He didn't think that this was something that couldn't be said. However, in the current situation he couldn't do anything. His plan was slowly unfolding, and the number of subordinates he subdued was also increasing. But it wasn't enough. He still had a grudge to take. Moreover, she was too young. She didn't even have her period. She was really too young. Even if he could wait for her to grow up. To him, she couldn't just stay by his side like this. After all, he still had a grudge to take and she should live a normal life, not be like him, a hooligan on the streets. Therefore, he thought of a way to find a former colleague of Qiao Ruoliu, who had a good relationship with Qiao Ruoliu. Then he arranged for her to go to school. In his eyes, his relationship with Shi Mengwan was getting better and better. He could feel the starlight in the girl's eyes when she looked at him. He could also feel the closeness the girl had to him every night. She would fall asleep in his arms. She would cook every day and wait for him to come home. Under the light, she did her homework very seriously and attentively. He could tell that she liked school very much. Even though she had dropped a lot of homework, there was a smile on her face. She obviously liked school. Not only was she good at her studies, but because she could go to school, she took care of him even more attentively. Other than cooking, she actually knew how to change clothes. For a period of time, he even felt that other than being too young, they were no different from husband and wife at other times. Later, he looked at her in high spirits and said that she wanted to be a fashion designer when she grew up. At that time, Shi Mengwan's eyes lit up. That was good. She did what she liked and he did what he wanted to do. He let her go to school and worked hard to help her realize her dream. And his methods outside became more and more ruthless because he wanted to make himself stronger as quickly as possible. Everything went very smoothly. He thought that when his power grew stronger, when he took his revenge, Shi Mengwan would also grow up. Shi Mengwan had also grown up. At that time they could really be together. What he didn't expect was that his rapid rise would provoke the big shot, Hui. He got someone to deal with him. That day Shi Mingwan said very happily that she wanted to go play. He knew about Mount Qing. He had been there before when he was young with his parents. To him, those memories had already become a wound that he didn't want to touch. But looking at Shi Mingwan's smiling face, he couldn't refuse. They went to Mount Qing, climbed the mountain, and played. Everything was beautiful. She was happy and so was he. He thought that this kind of happiness would last forever. However, when they went down the mountain they met the big shots people. It wasn't just the big shots people. The people who came later were Zhang Kuan's people. When he was beaten to the ground and couldn't get up, he saw Shi Mingwan get kicked and her body flew out. At that moment his heart was broken. He was beaten to the point that he didn't have the strength to fight back, not to mention that the other party had a weapon in his hand. And he was only one person. The moment he lost consciousness he thought that he was dead for sure. His only regret was that this kind of life was indeed a dream. Not only could he not live a peaceful life, but he also implicated Shi Mingwan. If it was possible, he would definitely let her go back and live a peaceful and normal life. However, Zhang Haoze didn't expect that when he opened his eyes again, not only was he not dead, but he was also saved by someone. The person who saved him was Qin Feifei. Qin Feifei happened to see his face at that time. As a young girl she was obsessed with looks and liked handsome people. At that time Shi Mingwan fell behind the tree. Qin Feifei didn't see her at first glance. She only saw Zhang Haoze. She brought Zhang Haoze home. After Zhang Haoze woke up, he knew that he had been saved by Qin Feifei. And he also figured out the situation in the shortest time possible. Qin Yongchang's company could be considered to be of a large scale in Lin City. Although it couldn't compare to the Su family and the Li family, it still had some power. Especially since Qin Yongchang's maternal family was in the province. It didn't take him long to realize that this was an excellent shelter. Especially when Qin Feifei, who was still young, had an extraordinary liking for him. With the Qin family's power he went to school, started a business and developed his own power. Of course he also gave the Qin family some feedback. This could be considered as taking what they needed. As for Shi Mingwan, she was suppressed in the corner of his memory and was no longer mentioned. Before he succeeded, before he had the ability, the further away he was from her, the safer it would be for her. What if Shi Mingwan was with another man? He thought that this was also good. There was nothing bad about it. At least, it was safer and happier than being by his side. After all, the more he grew up, the more he understood what kind of giant the Zhan family was. With his current ability he couldn't touch the Zhan family at all. He could only plan slowly. Take your time. Moreover, he was prepared. If he really couldn't do it, he would perish together with Zhang Kuan. No matter what, he had to take revenge for his parents and sister. But he really didn't expect that he would meet Shi Mingwan. In the hospital, she looked at him and called him dear brother with such a surprised look in her eyes. At that moment he could feel the impulse in his heart. It was a kind of breathtaking. He looked at Shi Mingwan and had a feeling that it was as expected. She had grown up and was so beautiful that it couldn't be compared. He had once imagined what that bright and smiling girl would look like when she grew up. He had imagined that she would be very beautiful when she grew up. But he didn't expect her to be even more beautiful than he had imagined. Seeing her call him dear brother with a face full of surprise, seeing her pounce over to acknowledge him with a face full of surprise, he almost agreed. But it was only almost. Those emotions were perfectly restrained by him. His path was a lonely one. He didn't need friends, nor did he need love. If he could resist not looking for Shi Mingwan for more than 10 years, he could force himself not to see her and not acknowledge her in the future. But time and time again they met again and again, causing his heart to become more and more out of control. He tried hard to push her away, but she tried hard to make him admit his identity. Until that time when he was drugged and lost control for a moment. No, it couldn't be considered to be out of control. He instinctively hoped that if he had to have a woman, that woman was Shi Mingwan. But this wouldn't do. From time to time the people arranged by Qingqing would die in Zhang Kuan's hands. Zhang Kuan was careful when he did things and never left any traces. Uncle Qi had followed him for decades, so there was no need to elaborate on his loyalty to him. If he hadn't borrowed the Qin family's power, it wouldn't have been as simple as just receiving a lesson. He was sometimes cold and sometimes warm towards Shi Mingwan, and he was sometimes distant. The impulse in his youth, the amazement after Shi Mingwan grew up. He wanted to push her away, but he was reluctant. He wanted to get closer, but he was afraid that it would make her feel unsafe. Qingqing's progress was considered smooth, but it was only on the surface. The Zhan family was too big, and with Zhang Kuan's support over the years, Zhan Lai's brothers as well as his grandchildren, all had their own thoughts. The situation in the Zhan family was very chaotic, but because of Zhan Kuan's strength, it was firmly under control. He could only tear open the Zhan family bit by bit. During this process, all the coldness and neglect that Shi Mengwan felt from him were because he had no choice but to do it. He knew how much pain Shi Mengwan was in, but he couldn't say it. He couldn't say anything. When he had nothing, Shi Mengwan was willing to suffer with him. In such a dangerous situation, Shi Mengwan probably wanted to stay by his side even more. But he couldn't. He would rather stay away from her. He even seemed to be engaged to Qin Feifei. But he didn't expect that he had overestimated his self-control. When Xiao Qi, Wan Xianyang and other men appeared by Shi Mengwan's side, he still couldn't restrain himself. He wanted to trap her by his side and make her belong to him completely from body to heart. He was a selfish man. If he didn't see Shi Mengwan, if he didn't see her, then he could really let her marry someone else and be with other men. But he couldn't. If he didn't get it, then it didn't matter if he lost it. But after getting it and then losing it, he found that he couldn't accept it. He could only destroy her with other men time and time again. He trapped her by his side time and time again, reminding her that she belonged to him. On the surface he was very successful. But he knew that she wasn't happy. If he wanted her to be happy, he had to stop taking revenge. This was even more difficult for him. In a dilemma, he sped up his actions, but he discovered a new difficulty. He wanted Zhan Kuan's life, but he didn't want to put himself in danger anymore. Because of Shi Mengwan, he still wanted to be with her, spend the rest of his life together, form a family together, and perhaps have 1 or 2 more children. So he hesitated. When Uncle Qi came looking for him, he decided to follow his plan. He wanted to get the Zhan family and make Zhan Kuan pay the price. As for him, he didn't want to get a single cent of the Zhan family. 1. Zhan Haoze wrapped his arms around Shi Mengwan's waist and held her in his arms. "I'm sorry." He didn't acknowledge her when she recognized him, and he didn't make it clear to her immediately. This was his pride, but it was also his selfishness. The tip of Shi Mengwan's nose was a little sore, and her eyes were swollen. She buried her face in his chest. She had received too much news today and she didn't know how to react. She had always known that he was her dear brother, but she had never thought that one day he would admit it himself. "I thought you would never admit it in your life. I'm sorry." Other than these 3 words, Zhan Haoze didn't know what else he could say. Shi Mengwan shook her head. How proud was he? She knew it before. Seeing that he never told her anything outside, she could roughly understand that in his heart, he always liked to put her in the position of a protector. "I should have told you earlier." Shi Mengwan didn't care about what he said. Instead, what she cared about was another thing. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "You said that if I didn't recognize you, you wouldn't have come to look for me?" "Yes." "Even if I was with another man? Even if I got married and had children?" Zhan Haoze's expression was a little subtle for a moment, but he still nodded. "Yes." Shi Mengwan's eyes were even redder than before. "Do you know that if you really did that, it would be the greatest cruelty to me?" 1. He knew, but he also believed that even if that was the case, she would live a good life. "I've been looking for you for more than 10 years. But they all said that there's no such person as Qiao Zhe." She wrapped her arms around his waist tightly as if seeking some comfort. "I don't believe it and I refuse to give up. Do you know why people from Song Seeking Studio are called Song Seeking? It's because I want to find you, my dear brother. Dear brother, ever since I saw you that year and was saved by you in my heart, there's only one person I want to be with, and it's only you." Zhan Haoze looked at the sincerity in her eyes and reached out to wipe away the tears at the corner of her eyes. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. "I know. If you know, why didn't you come to look for me? I want you to be happy. Without you, my happiness would be discounted." She had family, friends, and her own career. She could also live a good life, but her happiness would be missing a piece. That piece was something only he could give her. "Who asked you to take away my first kiss? Who asked you to appear in my life? So, you have to take responsibility." "Okay." Zhan Haoze nodded. "I'll be responsible for your life from now on." Shi Mengwan smiled. She buried her face in his chest and gently rubbed against it. "Dear brother." "Yes." "Dear brother." "Yes." "Dear brother." Shi Mengwan had a surreal feeling which made her keep calling him dear brother. Zhan Haoze couldn't help but lower his head and give her a deep kiss. Shi Mengwan took the initiative to cater to him, but not long after she reacted. She took a step back and looked at the tombstone beside her, a little embarrassed. "It's okay. Mom and Dad will like you. As if he knew what she was thinking, Jean Hause's voice was a little teasing. This was the first time she had seen Jean Hause so relaxed and casual. She bit her lip, a little nervous. Has your trouble been resolved? It's all resolved. Once Jean Kuan died, the fall of the Jean family was inevitable. Of course, before the fall of the Jean family, he had already broken the Jean family's business into parts, and then reorganized it. In those few months he only slept 3 hours a day. After his operations, the current Jean family was already a brand new Jean family without Jean Kuan. All of Jean Kuan's Jean family no longer existed. The new Jean family was formed by him, a brand new business kingdom. Shi Mingwan nodded. Dear brother, we'll be together forever, right? Yes. That's great. Shi Mingwan hugged Jean Hause again. I'll call you dear brother from now on, okay? Okay. Dear brother. Yes. Dear brother. Yes. I love you. Me too. Dear brother. Shi Mingwan suddenly raised her head and looked at him with a focused expression. What my mother said last time was a lie to you. My mother won't want me to get a son-in-law. I know. Father Shi had already said that Shi Mingwan didn't need to make any sacrifices. It didn't matter who she married as long as she was happy. You have a very good pair of parents. You too. Shi Mingwan gripped his hand tightly and looked at the 3 tombstones. Dear brother. Dear brother, believe me, your parents must want you to live well. Not for him to take revenge. Although he had already succeeded. But he believed that all parents in this world only wanted their children to grow up safely. Yes. I know. Jean Hause held her hand tightly. Let's go. Let's go down the mountain. He turned around and looked at the tombstones. Finally, he bowed, and when he raised his head again, there was a faint smile on his face. It was bright and sunny, completely different from the gloomy atmosphere of the past. Dad, Mom, don't worry. I'll live well. For myself, for you, and for Wanwan. Then goodbye, Auntie and Uncle. Shi Mingwan also bowed, but the way she addressed him attracted Jean Hause's objection. You should call them Mom and Dad too. Shi Mingwan blinked as if she was a little embarrassed. In the end, she readily accepted his advice. Dad, Mom, Sister, goodbye. I'll come to see you with Hause next time. Jean Hause smiled, held Shi Mingwan's hand, and left together. Wanwan. When they went down the mountain, Jean Hause suddenly called Shi Mingwan's name. Yes. I founded XM Company in Lin City. XM is just an abbreviation, but the Chinese meaning is to dream. I miss Mingwan. Shi Mingwan was stunned for a moment. She turned around and looked at him. There was a flash of surprise in her eyes. Dear brother? Thank you. Wanwan. Jean Hause stopped and looked at her. Thank you for waiting for me. Without her, he could still continue to take revenge. He could continue to live his own life. But at the same time, his happiness would also be discounted. Without Shi Mingwan, his life wouldn't be as perfect as it was now. However, Jean Hause didn't expect that it could be even more perfect than it was now. His wedding with Shi Mingwan was scheduled for October. They separated in October, so they chose to get married in October. After the wedding, they were supposed to go on a honeymoon, but unexpectedly. As soon as the wedding ended, Shi Mingwan vomited profusely. The nervous Jean Hause called the doctor to check Shi Mingwan's body, only to find out that she was already more than 2 months pregnant. Because she had been busy with the wedding and the studio, she didn't even know. Because of the severe morning sickness, Jean Hause and she naturally couldn't go on a honeymoon. 7 months later, Shi Mingwan gave birth to a very cute baby girl. Jean Hause wanted a daughter wholeheartedly, and now his wish was finally fulfilled. He thought to himself that his life was truly perfect now. Chapter 7:11. When Li Qianxue entered the room, there were already several people sitting inside. Speaking of which, they had all worked with the Li Corporation before. Sitting at the head of the table was her ex-in-law, Qiu Yanba's father, Qiu Tonghe. They were all familiar faces: the Zheng family, the Song family, the Wu family, and the Chang family. Li Qianxue nodded at a few people and greeted them one by one. Then she sat down in a seat near the head of the table. Today was a private banquet. No matter what, Qiu Tonghe was once his in-laws. Although the two of them weren't going to get married, they didn't want to become enemies. There was still a connection. Qianxue. Qiu Tonghe had a good relationship with Li Qianxue. In the past, they used to call each other in-laws. Now, there was nothing wrong with calling each other by name. He asked Li Qianxue to sit down and poured her a cup of tea. Li Qianxue had been socializing a lot in the past 6 months, but everyone knew the rules. She usually didn't drink outside. Brother Qiu, if you have something to say, just say it. There's no need to be so polite. Even if she doesn't give face to Chiu Tongha, she still has to give face to old Master Chiu. Then I'll be straightforward. What Chiu Tongha wanted to talk about today had something to do with Hu Jinyao. Earlier, Madame Luo and Madame Song had teamed up with Su Peijian and accidentally injured Xiang Kaiping. At that time, no one knew that Xiang Kaiping was Su Qingsang's biological mother. Hu Jinyao didn't direct his anger at the Su family, but at the Luo family and the Song family. There was no need to mention the Luo family. The Star Luo department store had been acquired by the Tianyu Group. Now it was simply miserable. The Song family's Kisong Electronics was even more humiliated by Hu Jinyao. Look, it's been so long. Recently, Brother Luo has found some new connections, but your son-in-law is too powerful. They don't dare to give him the list. Qianxue. No matter what, they were family friends. Don't push things too far, don't you think? Chiu Tongha didn't want to get involved in these things, but the Luo family and the Song family begged the Chou family. Now, only the Chou clan had some face in front of the Li clan. He had to give it to her. Li Qianxue knew about these things. When she came in and saw the Luo family and the Song family, she roughly guessed the other party's intentions. I can't make the decision on this matter. Qianxue, that's not appropriate. Your president was mother-in-law. He has to listen to you, right? Not to mention the fact that Hu Jinyao isn't in Lin City right now. Even if he was, he might not listen to me. At the very least, shouldn't you be looking for Hu Jinyao now? Look, you said it yourself. President Hua isn't in Lin City. We can't find him even if we want to. Moreover, President Hua is still standing up for your daughter, isn't he? But Mrs. Luo and Mrs. Song did it for your other daughter. Li Qianshua's expression did not look too good. Of course she knew that. Speaking of which, Su Peijian was the one who started this. But what of it? Speaking of which, if it weren't for Mrs. Luo and Mrs. Song, Su Qingsang wouldn't have felt guilty towards Xiang Kaiping. In the end, she even almost refused to acknowledge her as her mother and called Xiang Kaiping her mother instead. Thinking of this, Li Qianxue felt uncomfortable and naturally didn't want to get involved in this matter. Qianxue, it's all in the past. Mrs. Luo and Mrs. Song also know that they were wrong. Besides, this has nothing to do with old Luo and old Song. Why don't you ask your son-in-law to be merciful and let them go? Mr. Luo and Mr. Song, who were called out, began to smile apologetically. Li Qianxue felt bored. She couldn't eat at all in such a situation. She looked at the two of them. Okay. I'll tell Hu Jinyao not to deal with you in the future. However, if you do anything to provoke Hu Jinyao in the future, it's none of my business. Of course, of course. How can I? I won't do anything stupid again. The two of them promised together. The matter was finally resolved. Chiu Tongha wanted to ask someone to serve the dishes, but Li Qianxue couldn't eat anymore. She got up and left the hotel. She didn't want to go home. Li Qianxue sat in the car. The driver in front, Xiao Zhao, asked twice where she was going. In the end, she told him the name of a bar. It wasn't that she couldn't go home to drink, but it wouldn't be good if old Master Li saw her like this. Su Qingsang followed Hu Jinyao to Rong City. Su Yusin had already gone to school after getting into college. There were only her and old Master Li at home. It was fine during the day. Li Qianxue could focus all her energy on work. But at night she couldn't. As soon as she returned home, she couldn't help but think of some things in the past. Her sweet daughter, her obedient son. Although Su Qinghui didn't love her, he would come home every day. At that time the family wasn't happy, but at least it wouldn't be as lonely as it was now. After entering the bar, Xiao Zhao couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. Li Qianxue just wanted to have a drink or two. At her age, what could she do? Wait for me. Come in and pick me up later. If it weren't for Xiao Zhao, she wouldn't have dared to go into a bar alone to drink. Beautiful women always attracted people's attention, even if this woman didn't look young. For Li Qianxue, age had added a different kind of sexiness to her. She ordered a glass of Bloody Mary and sat on the edge of the bar, drinking. Li Qianxue was born in a big family and had been carefully trained by old Master Li since she was a child. Her temperament really didn't fit in with the people around her. But it was this incompatibility that attracted the attention of many people. Before she finished a glass of wine, someone had already come over to strike up a conversation. Miss, can we have a drink together? No. Li Qianxue didn't even look back. She wasn't interested in knowing who the person was. Don't be so petty. How boring is it to drink alone? It's more interesting to drink together. As the man spoke, he reached out his hand to Li Qianxue. Before Li Qianxue could knock the man's hand away, another hand was faster than her. Su Qinghui gently twisted the man's hand. He stood there, and his usually elegant face actually had a hint of fierceness at this moment. You, get lost. Su Qinghui's voice was very cold. The man withdrew his hand and took a step back. He wanted to leave like this, but he felt embarrassed, so he could only leave after saying some harsh words. Just you wait. Su Qinghui ignored the man's harsh words and turned to look at Li Qianxue. She had already finished the wine in her glass and ordered a second glass. When she picked up the glass, he blocked her movement. Qianxue, stop drinking. Who are you? Li Qianxue looked at Su Qinghui and raised her eyebrows slightly. The last time the two of them met was when she went to Rong City to visit Su Qingsang. It had been more than a month since then. After returning to Lin City, they were both in the mall. They would meet frequently. However, Li Qianxue had the ability to make herself ignore Su Qinghui. She had met him a few times when she came back, but every time she completely ignored Su Qinghui. Su Qinghui knew how much she hated him. He felt helpless, but he couldn't let her keep drinking here. Qianxue, be obedient. If you want to drink, go back and drink. Li Qianxue's alcohol tolerance was not bad. A glass of wine was nothing to her. She looked at Su Qinghui's hand on her wrist, raised her hand and easily waved it away. Be obedient? Who are you? Why should I listen to you? This was the second time she had said this. A flash of bitterness appeared in Su Qinghui's eyes. Qianxue, I don't think Dad would want you to do this, right? He didn't know what had happened to make Li Qianxue come out to drink, but he believed that old Master Li would definitely not agree. Who are you calling Dad? Su Qinghui, that's no longer your father. She was a little annoyed. The person she didn't want to see the most just now was Su Qinghui. If it weren't for his selfishness, the Li family wouldn't have had so many troubles later on. Thinking of this, she couldn't stay any longer. She withdrew her hand and stood up. Su Qinghui followed behind her. Qianxue, I'll send you back. No need. Li Qianxue stopped. Who said I'm going back? I'm just going to the bathroom. Qianxue. Su Qinghui didn't believe that Li Qianxue would be a person who would throw a tantrum. However, her actions in front of him really made him feel that she was throwing a tantrum with him. Su Qinghui, have you had enough? Li Qianxue looked at the worry on his face. She didn't feel touched. She only felt that it was hypocritical. What? Are you worried about me now? Yes. Su Qinghui nodded. It's not safe for a woman to drink outside alone. Who said I'm alone? Xiao Zhao is outside. Li Qianxue's face was a little red because of the alcohol. She wasn't drunk. She knew that. She stood up straight and looked at Su Qinghui with a flash of mockery on her face. Also, you really don't have to worry about me. Let's not talk about the fact that I'm just your ex-wife. We're already divorced and have nothing to do with each other. To me, the person who hurts me the most in this world is you. If you're really worried about me, then don't appear in front of me. Otherwise, every time I see you, I'll feel uncomfortable. Su Qinghui's expression didn't look good. His eyes flashed with pain again. Qianxue, stop. Don't call me. I'm disgusted. Li Qianxue wasn't in the mood to continue drinking, and she didn't plan to stay any longer. Su Qinghui, I'll have to trouble you to put away the damn hypocrisy, guilt, and pain on your face. Because the person who should be in pain should be me, not you. Su Qinghui was stabbed by her words again. For a moment, his body couldn't help but tilt. Qianxue, yes, stop. Li Qianxue really didn't want to hear that sentence. Don't say those 3 words. It's too degrading. Su Qinghui, what you've done makes me want to stab you 1,000,000 times. Don't say those 3 words in front of me. Really, when I hear them, I feel even more disgusted. Qianxue, do we have to be like this? No matter what, they had a child together and so many marriages. Was there really nothing good in her heart that she could miss and think about? No. Li Qianxue shook her head. If you don't appear in front of me, you won't have to do this, right? Su Qinghui stood still. From the time of the divorce until now, he actually knew what kind of person Li Qianxue was. He also knew that it was difficult for him to ask for her forgiveness, but every time he had to endure her words and attitude, it still made him feel pain. In the past, he was the one who made her suffer. Now, it was the other way around. It was she who made him suffer. However, he would rather be mocked by her words than see her. Li Qianxue ignored him. She couldn't stay where Su Qinghui was. She couldn't stay for even a minute. After leaving the bar, Xiao Zhao was still waiting. Li Qianxue was about to get into the car when Su Qinghui came over again. Qianxue? Li Qianxue looked at his hand that was holding hers. If you don't let go, do you believe that I'll chop off your hand? Su Qinghui retracted his hand and took a step back because of her attitude. Qianxue, I came to see you today because I have something to tell you. What else can I have to say to you? Li Qianxue blinked. She was really curious. She thought that she and Su Qinghui had nothing to say to each other. Last time I saw Mayor Li, I think you should be more cautious about the Li Corporation's latest project. I heard that there has been a change in the plan. Li Qianxue paused for a moment. She knew about that project. It was one of the plans that she carried out independently after the Li Corporation stabilized in her hands. Had there been a change in the plan? She hadn't heard about it yet, but looking at Su Qinghui, she didn't like his current attitude. She suddenly approached Su Qinghui. Are you trying to curry favor with me? Qianxue, do you have to think that everything I do has a purpose and is so unbearable? Do you need me to think about how unbearable you are? Li Qianxue sneered. Don't you know how unbearable you are? Su Qinghui's expression didn't look good. Li Qianxue took a step back and retreated to the side of the car door. Su Qinghui, you don't get up early without benefits. Everything you do has a purpose. Don't think that I will appreciate your kindness just because you are trying to curry favor with me. Don't forget. Wu Jingyao is my son-in-law. And Mayor Li has a good relationship with him. If anything happens, Mayor Li will definitely inform me and only you. Qianxue, I really don't mean anything else. I just want to remind you. I thank you. Li Qianxue nodded, but in fact she didn't appreciate it at all. The Li Corporation has nothing to do with you now. I have nothing to do with you anymore. So I don't need your reminder. I won't thank you either. She opened the car door. Before getting into the car, she glanced at Su Qinghui again. Based on what you have done, no matter what you do, I will never forgive you, so you can give up. I will never forgive you in this life. Please don't appear in front of me next time. That way I can thank you for letting me have peace. After saying this, Li Qianxue got into the car without hesitation. Xiao Zhao sat in the front seat. When Li Qianxue saw his eyes in the rearview mirror, she glanced at him coldly. This is the last time. If there is a next time, you don't have to work in the Li family anymore. Xiao Zhao shrank his neck. At that moment he was actually shocked by Li Qianxue's gaze. Madam, you can't blame me. Sir. No, what did President Su say? If you think Su Qinghui is better, you can help him drive. I don't mind. Xiao Zhao completely stopped talking. Li Qianxue didn't want to pay any more attention to him. She closed her eyes to rest. Thinking of what Su Qinghui had said just now, she was inexplicably even more annoyed. Ridiculous. Did he really think that she would forgive him? Dream on. Li Qianxue handed the document in her hand to her secretary Yang Rong, and gestured for her to leave first. Then she looked at Wei Ting, who had been sitting opposite her for a long time. Wei Ting, your current actions have already interfered with me. How could that be? I think you're ignoring me. Wei Ting looked at Li Qianxue and spoke with a hint of grievance. Li Qianxue resisted the urge to hold her forehead. She picked up the photo frame on the desk and faced Wei Ting. Do you see this? This is my grandson, my granddaughter. I'm already a grandmother, so you can stop wasting your time on me. It was a group photo. She, Old Master Li, Su Qingsang, Su Yusin, and their 2 children. The photo was taken last month when Su Qingsang's twins were 1 month old. She and Su Qingsang sat on both sides of Old Master Li, each holding a child. Su Yusin stood behind them. Li Qianxue liked this photo very much. To her, this was a real family photo. So she came back and had it washed and placed on the desk. So what? Wei Ting glanced at the photo and pointed at Li Qianxue. With you like this, even if you say you're their mother, people will believe you. Li Qianxue couldn't help but hold her forehead this time. She looked at Wei Ting. President Wei, I really still have business to deal with. Can you please leave first? But you haven't promised me to have dinner with me tonight. Wei Ting looked even more wronged. Today is my birthday. Are you that heartless? First, your birthday has nothing to do with me. Second, you also said that it was your birthday last week. Third, I really have something to do today. I have a social engagement tonight, so I refuse. First, I'm pursuing you. I want you to be my girlfriend, so my birthday has something to do with you. Second, I was on the Gregorian calendar last week. Today is the lunar calendar. Can't I? Third, if you want to go to a social engagement, I can accompany you. After all, how inconvenient is it for a woman to go to a social engagement alone? President Wei. Li Qianxue wasn't a sloppy person. The situation in front of her gave her a headache. If you insist on not leaving, I can only call the security guards to chase you away. Qianxue, you don't have to be so cruel to me, do you? I'm just a young man who admires you. Li Qianxue was so angry that she laughed. Yes, I'm already a grandmother and you're still a young man. So it's impossible between us. Don't say that. People abroad are still together when they're in their 20s. You're only a dozen years older than me. I can accept it. But I can't. Li Qinxue was serious. I can't accept a relationship between an older woman and a younger man. Even if he's older than me by a day or an hour, I can't. Rules are dead, people are alive. Wei Ting was still trying to convince Li Qinxue. Li Qinxue was annoyed. She closed the document in her hand and looked at Wei Ting seriously. Last week I met your mother by chance, President Wei. President Wei, if you stay here any longer, I don't mind asking your mother to come and take you away. Qinxue. Wei Ting's face fell. You don't have to be so heartless, do you? He was about to pretend to be pitiful when Li Qinshue's internal line rang. Li Qinshu didn't want to pay attention to him and pressed the answer button. Yang Rong said that Su Qinghui was here. I won't see him. They had just met yesterday. Why was he here today? Li Qinshu was inexplicably annoyed. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.